Hi folks, welcome back to the Tabletop's Edge. Today we have a playthrough video of a scenario from the Fighting Wings system. This is what I hope will be the first in a new series I'm calling the Logbook. Fighting Wings is a tactical air combat game covering the World War II era from the late 1930s through the late 1940s. It's designed by J.D. Webster and published by Clash of Arms Games. I have a review of Wings of the Motherland and the Fighting Wings system in general on my channel, and I recommend you check that out for a quick orientation to Fighting Wings if you're unfamiliar with it. You'll know from the review that Fighting Wings is my favorite air combat game and one of my favorite all-time war games. Now, what I hope to do with this series is give you a look at how the game actually plays. I'll be doing my usual playthrough technique of showing you the turn as it unfolds, explaining the thought process of each side as the game progresses. I also hope to demonstrate just how suitable Fighting Wings is for solo play, as I know a lot of gamers end up playing solo either through circumstance or preference. Now, this is such an outstanding system that I really do want to try to help raise its profile in the wider hobby. This playthrough series will not include every Fighting Wing scenario. That would be impossible, as there are literally hundreds of published scenarios. Wings of the Motherland alone has over 200 scenarios in the box. Now, Fighting Wings can recreate every and any aspect of the air war during World War II, from one-on-one fighter contests to large bomber raids on infrastructure to close air support against enemy troops and vehicles, and attacks on ships either at sea or in port. So what I will try to do with this series is select some scenarios that illustrate the flexibility and comprehensiveness of Fighting Wings. Not only does the game model the combats, but it also has rules covering the entire mission from takeoff to touchdown, and I plan on including some of those scenarios in this series. If, after watching my review and this playthrough, you are thinking about giving Fighting Wings a try, I'll have some comments on that at the end, so stay tuned. I could go on about Fighting Wings all day and have already gone on longer than I intended, so let's get into the action and take a look at today's scenario. I had to think a while, given the huge number of choices, as to which scenario to use. With my limited filming opportunities currently, I wanted something reasonably small and straightforward that I could finish in a decent amount of time. I thought about using one of the many solitaire design scenarios, but I want to demonstrate that even multiplayer scenarios in Fighting Wings can be played solo. While this playthrough series will not be in strictly historical chronological order like the GCACW series, I do want to start off with a scenario or two near the beginning of the war, and I think I've found one. It's out of the expansion six-pack number 4, as you can see. Now, what is a six-pack? Well, despite the many boxed products published to date for Fighting Wings, there remain many aircraft types and variants for which no aircraft data cards exist. So JD has put together a line of small expansions where you get 6 aircraft data cards and a slew of scenarios that use them for $6. Also, six-pack is a term with a couple of other aviation connotations, so it's a great title for the expansions. For example, six-pack is a term used to reference the modern standardized layout of an aircraft's instrument panel. And secondly, pilots love beer, and beer comes in six-packs. Each six-pack has a theme, as well as a couple of pages of historical info related to the topic, and a nice paragraph-sized write-up of each aircraft featured on the ADCs. As you can see, today's scenario comes from six-pack number 4, whose theme is the early RAF operations over the Heligoland Bight. And while I'm not trying to do this series chronologically, the scenario I've chosen does occur on September 4th, 1939, so right at the beginning of the war in Europe, and is called Bomber Command's First. Let's take a look at the background and setup of the scenario. Here's the setup for the scenario showing all the aircraft involved. For the RAF, we have 3 Wellington Mark 1s here, and on the German side, we've got a Schwarm of 4 Bf-109 E1s, which is the first model in the E series of the 109. Now, the Wellingtons start at 400 feet, 600 feet, and 800 feet, respectively, while the leading pair of 109s is at 1,200 feet, and the trailing pair here is at 1,400 feet. The Wellingtons also start out in a shallow dive, although not for much longer given their low altitude, while the 109s are all in a right bank and level currently. Now, the background on this scenario is that a Blenheim on early morning reconnaissance spotted the battle cruisers Gneisenau and Scharnhorst in the Brunsbüttel anchorage. 14 Wellingtons from 2 squadrons were sent to attack them. However, foul weather and dense rain hampered the operation. The 8 Wellingtons of 149 Squadron RAF were never able to join up with the 6 from 9 Squadron as planned. 5 of the 149 Squadron crews eventually gave up and aborted the mission after getting separated from the others while flying through dense rain. The remaining Vic of 149 Squadron, led by Squadron Leader Harris, also got split up into singles by the dense clouds. One actually found and bombed the battle cruisers but missed. Harris never saw them and bombed a bridge instead. The last of his trio accidentally bombed neutral shipping in Denmark. Behind them, the 6 Wellingtons of 9 Squadron fared almost as poorly, splitting into 2 independent Vics due to the weather. The second Vic found and bombed the cruisers first. Under heavy AAA fire, all missed and hastily fled into clouds as enemy fighters arrived. The leading Vic, led by Squadron Leader Lamb, arrived last and, failing to spot the cruisers, bombed an unknown merchant vessel instead. To Squadron Leader Lamb's dismay, his Vic was then spotted by BF-109s of 2nd Group Jagdgeschwader 77 as he let it down to sea level to leave the area. Under attack, Lamb and one of his wingmen turned into a nearby cluster of clouds, momentarily escaping, but the last Wellington kept in the clear for reasons unknown and was shot down by Feldwebel Teutsch. This was Bomber Command's first recorded loss to an enemy fighter. Sometime later, Lamb's other wingman got separated in the clouds and was shot down by other 109s. Lamb's gunners believed, wrongly as it turns out, that the flight had shot down a BF-109 in return. In fact, no BF-109s were actually lost. Now, on the map here, you will see that we have some clouds set up in the hexes here, representing that low cloud bank. And there are a few special rules for this particular scenario. First of all, regarding pilot quality, all pilots and bomber crews are regulars, so there won't be any penalties or advantages for crew quality. Some notes on the Wellingtons. The bombers are unladen, having dropped their bombs previously, and these are the early Mark 1s with no belly turrets. Now, Wellington number 3, which is this guy right here, must avoid entering any clouds. The bombers may all fly freely. They are not constrained by the rigid formation rules, which is one reason why I chose this scenario, so that there will be at least some maneuvering on both sides, and we'll get to see how the initiative works in the Fighting Wings series. As far as the weather, the poor weather referenced in the background, there is a solid cloud deck from altitude 1,500 feet up to 5,000. We've got markers in the hexes to represent the low cloud bank, and those clouds exist in those hexes from sea level up to 1,000 feet. Any aircraft flying into these clouds or into the overcast above is removed from play at the start of the next turn. Aircraft can be attacked or fired defensively on the turn of cloud entry, with a -10 likelihood to any shots for each hex of range in clouds the guns fire into. Now, if Wellington number 3, again, this guy right here, enters cloud, it will be destroyed after removal from play due to faulty instruments causing a crash. Now, victory. The Luftwaffe must shoot down at least one Wellington and have more victory points to win. Yes, Fighting Wings does use victory points to determine victory in its scenarios, and we'll talk about that a little bit further as we move through the scenario here in just a couple of minutes. The RAF wins if they have more victory points at the end. Any other result is a draw. Now, each bomber that exits play or is still in play at the end of turn 20 earns the RAF 5 bonus victory points. So this scenario is going to be very much about the bombers attempting to stay alive and or escape. The turn length of the scenario is 20 turns, which is a fairly common turn length for many of the fighting wing scenarios. They tend to be between 20 or 30 turns in length. This one happens to be 20 turns. Now it's going to be roughest on Wellington #3 here, since they cannot duck into the clouds to avoid the attacker. So they will have to actually survive on map here for the full 20 turns, which is probably going to be rather difficult. Now, before we actually dive in and start, I think it would be very helpful if we reviewed the ADCs for the aircraft involved to give us a better idea of the capabilities of both sides. And we'll start off by looking at the ADC for the BF-109. And while this is a playthrough series, not a tutorial series, I will be explaining enough of the rules, hopefully, that you'll be able to follow along and understand what's happening and why, even if you have no previous Fighting Wings experience. And so for the first several turns, I will be going into a fair amount of detail. We'll also be looking at all of the charts that are involved in the game. I'll explain how those work and what I'm looking for on those. And then as the scenario progresses and we've gone over things a few times, we'll start to streamline that a little bit, and you'll see how things unfold. Now, looking at the ADCs, which really are fantastic, they're some of the best parts of the series, in my opinion. We've got the name of the aircraft, including the type and variant in some cases. We've got this large, very nice line drawing of the aircraft in the upper right corner. The country that built it, Germany. You can see the service entry date of February 1939 here for the E1 model. The class of aircraft is a broad class. There are probably 5 or 6 classes altogether in the system. The F here stands for fighter, generally applies to single engine fighters. And then we have the victory points, which I mentioned earlier. Every aircraft is worth a certain amount of points. You can see we've got 2 numbers here. The first number, the 4, is the number of victory points awarded to the enemy for severely damaging this particular aircraft, and 7 points are awarded for actually destroying the aircraft. Severe damage, we can talk about that when we get further into the scenario, into combat, but you'll score points for severely damaging enemy aircraft as well as destroying them. Now you get either or. So at the end of the scenario, if a BF-109E has been severely damaged, you would get 4 points for it. If it has been destroyed, you get 7. You don't get 4 for severely destroying it and then another 7 for destroying it, or 4 for severely damaging it and another 7 for destroying it. It's one or the other. Awarded at the end of the scenario. You can also score a single victory point for every critical hit that you inflict on an enemy aircraft, and then each scenario will oftentimes have additional victory points. For instance, in this particular scenario, the RAF will get 5 bonus victory points for every Wellington that is still either alive on map at the end of 20 game turns, or that has managed to escape into the clouds. Now to the left, this box up here, we've got data such as the aircraft type. You can see it's a short-range day fighter. The engines, it has one Daimler-Benz DB601A, which has an engine power output of between 860 and 1100 horsepower and is liquid-cooled. The crew consists of a single pilot. Max speed is 347 miles per hour at 16,400 feet. And then we've got some max ceiling numbers here for how loaded the aircraft is. Defense factor is 5. That's going to be a fairly standard defense factor for all of your single engine aircraft. Size modifier, again, for a single engine fighter, that's kind of the standard. We'll see that the Wellingtons have a different size modifier here. Now, damage factor. We've got 2 numbers here. The first number represents the severe damage threshold. So when the number of hits on the aircraft exceeds 7, the aircraft will be considered severely damaged and it will suffer some penalties. 10 is the destruction rating. So when the number of hits on the aircraft exceeds 10, the aircraft is destroyed and shot down. Endurance 80, that's used for kind of those full mission scenarios that I talked about. And the cockpit view, poor and then a blind area to the rear. Now, protection. This represents things like armored cockpits or self-sealing fuel tanks. You can see on these early 109s, there's no protection here for the cockpit fuel tanks or the engine. The climb, decel, dive, excel, these are used to calculate the impact on speed from turn to turn, and we'll talk about this a little bit later as we get into the turns. You'll see that. And then it gives you a weight and load limit here and some information on weapon stations, which may be in some aircraft. You can put pod mounted guns or cannons. Some of them may be bombs, some of them may be fuel tanks. Below that, we get into the aircraft performance chart. And this is the first of the charts that you'll be referencing on almost a turn-by-turn basis here. Along the left-hand side here, we have a column representing the altitude in flight level. So each number corresponds to 1,000 feet. So this lowest level here is from sea level basically up to 6,000 feet. The next band is 7,000 to 12,000 and so on. And then the bands are very low, low, medium, high, high, very high, extremely high, and ultra high. You'll be reading across this chart for the information you need at whatever particular altitude your aircraft happens to be at. Now, in this scenario, we're going to be well below 6,000 feet with a cloud deck of 1,500 feet. We know anybody who climbs as high as 1,500 feet will be in that cloud deck and out of the game. So we're going to be in the very low band here. First number we have is the minimum speed, which is 2.0. Each point of speed in the Fighting Wings series equates to 50 miles per hour, roughly. So at a minimum speed of 2.0, that is the minimum speed at which the aircraft can continue to fly. If the 109's speed in the very low band ever falls below 2.0, it will stall. And at these altitudes, that's very likely to be fatal. Maximum speed. So we've got a minimum speed and a maximum speed. This is the maximum level speed that the aircraft can reach. And you can see here it is 6.0, which equates to very roughly 300 miles per hour. And we have a maximum dive speed. When diving, you are able to exceed your level speed because you've got that help from gravity, and that's 9.5. Exceeding the maximum dive speed risks some structural damage to the aircraft. And now we have our turn rate information. So the speed with which an aircraft can turn has been broken down in Fighting Wings into several different rates. And we've got an easy rate, which is not pictured here. Then we have a tight turn, hard turn, brake turn, and emergency turn rate. In order to turn at these various rates, it requires a minimum speed from the aircraft. So in order to turn at the tight turn rate, you need a minimum speed of at least 2.5. Now, to do a tighter turn at the hard turn rate, that speed needs to be 4.0, brake turn 4.5, and to do an emergency turn rate, you need to be going 5.5. As you can see, these numbers vary based on altitude, and it's also going to vary based on individual aircraft. The number in parentheses here next to the turn rate is the amount of deceleration points that the aircraft is going to pick up for each 30-degree facing. Fighting Wings uses a 30-degree facing system, so there are 12 different possible facings, both horizontally and in the vertical plane, and we'll look at that in a little bit when we get into the game and we look at the transition chart. So the terminology that Fighting Wings uses, if you're turning the nose, changing the direction of the aircraft horizontally, that's called a turn. If you are raising and lowering the nose, turning the aircraft in the vertical plane, that's referred to as a transition. And we can see over here on the right-hand side, we've just got a repetition of the altitude scale on the left side. And then finally over here, we have the average rate of climb in hundreds of feet. This is not used in the combat level scenarios, which is the type of scenario that we're playing today. This is going to be used more for the tactical and operational level missions here. Sliding further down the chart, we can see we've got our firepower information here on the left. And I'm going to skip over that for a minute and stay on the maneuver information. We have this power versus speed chart. Again, we see the familiar altitude scale here on the left-hand side, and just like this chart up here, you're going to read across on the line where the altitude your aircraft currently occupies. And you're going to see here, these are speed ranges up here. So from the speed of 1.0 to 4.5, you're going to use this column. These numbers are the amount of acceleration points that your engine will provide at various power settings. The number to the left of the slash is the maximum number of acceleration points that you're going to get from military power setting, and the number to the right is the emergency or war power setting. So you can see that at the very low band here, the 109 is going to be able to get a maximum of 8 acceleration points from the engine at emergency power setting. And then below that, now before we move on, as the aircraft goes faster, gains speed, the amount of power that you're able to get out of the engine is going to drop, and you're going to see that across all of the aircraft in the game. So with the 109, if they get to speed of 5.0 or faster, that 8 acceleration drops to only 5 acceleration. Below that, we've got 2 lines here. We have banking flight points and side slip flight points. This tells you how many flight points, either horizontal flight points or vertical flight points, need to be expended before the aircraft can roll one step in bank. So from level to left bank to inverted left to inverted right, right bank, and then back to level. There are 6 bank angles that are used in the game. And you can see as the aircraft is going faster, it's going to take its rate of roll, essentially, is what this represents, is going to be slower. Side slips, these are the number of flight points that need to be used before you can execute. These are the preparation flight points in order to execute a side slip or a skid maneuver. And again, you'll notice that they tend to increase as the speed of the aircraft increases. Now, back to the shooty bits. Over here in the firepower chart, you can see a listing of all of the weapons carried by the aircraft. In this case, we've got, as well as where the weapons are located. In this case, we have 4 7.9 millimeter MG-17 machine guns. These are the station abbreviations here. So we've got N1 and N2, which is nose 1 and nose 2. It means these 2 machine guns here are located in the nose of the aircraft, and you can see them right here on the line drawing. And the other 2 are in wing station 1 on the left and wing station 2 on the right. And you can kind of see them, you can make them out here and here. We have a list of ammunition for each individual gun. It is possible in this system for some weapons to jam, and therefore some may be firing more than others, which is why you've got ammo listed and broken out by each individual weapon. And then the criticals, this is the critical rating. For every, this tells you how many hits are required in a single attack in order to generate a critical hit. So if the 109 shoots at its opponent and it manages to score 4 or more hits with that single attack, we will then roll 1 critical hit. If they were to score 8 hits, we would roll 2 critical hits. And then down below here, we have our gun attack factors. We've got the range listed out here on the left. You can see the maximum range for these weapons on the 109s is 5 hexes. So to have any chance of hitting or doing any damage to the enemy, the 109 is going to have to be within a total range of 5 hexes of the enemy. And then we've got each column is broken down by each weapon station. So you can see at the various ranges, at range at 0, right up close, each of these MG-17s is going to do 6 or have a damage factor of 6. If you're firing all 4 of those in your attack, that's going to give you a total of 24 firepower factors. And we'll see how that works when we get into combat here. But you can see as the range increases, the attack factors drop off, and so the further the range, the more difficult it is to actually score some hits on an enemy aircraft. And then finally on the ADC, we have the notes and variants section down here with some pretty interesting little information. You do want to always read through these prior to the scenario to make sure you don't miss any particular quirks of that aircraft, or depending upon the time frame of the scenario, certain aircraft will have different equipment, maybe some different rules that apply to them. In our case, these are BF-109 E1s. You can see there are a couple of other variants here. There's the E1/B and the E5. The E1 is the initial machine gun armed model produced in parallel with cannon armed E3s until August 1940. It is difficult to land with a +10 likelihood, that's not a good thing, to landing attrition rolls. That will come in either in the post scenario, if you're interested in finding out whether the aircraft that survived the scenario that are still on map at the end, if they make it back and land safely at base, you'll do a landing attrition roll to see if that happens, or if they end up crashing on landing. There are no weapon stations on this E1 model. Armor was added in June of 1940, which is after the date of this scenario. So you would roll a D10, 3 or less on a D10 to have that armor, and then you subtract 3 per month after June when making that check. Now, if you do end up with the armor, the cockpit and fuel protection go from +0 to +1. A bulletproof front canopy was added in August of 1940. Again, a 4 or less on a D10 to see if it's armored, and then a -2 per month to that die roll after August. And if so, the cockpit protection goes to +2. And then you reduce all rate of climb numbers by 100 feet per minute. That's these numbers up here. And then the aircraft does have slatted wings, which we may end up seeing come into play in this scenario, but there are some rules for slatted wings. Now, for the E1/B variant, this is first appeared in July 1940. It's the Yabo variant. It's Station 1, which you can see right here under the center line, for one bomb of up to 550 pounds, or one ER4 adapter with 4 110-pound bombs. With the bombs, you either reduce the nose ammo to 8 and the wing guns are not loaded, or you reduce the endurance to 60 from 80, which we saw up top. Or you keep both and add 1.0 to the total load, which is the takeoff weight limits. And then the victory points, instead of being 4 for severely damaged and 7 for destroyed, this would be an 8 for destruction. Everything else is as a fully armored E1. And then the E5 variant appeared in May 1940. This is a tactical recon variant. Only 29 of them were ever built, with an RB21/18 vertical camera in the rear fuselage. Everything else is as the E1 here, and it was used by reconnaissance units. And then finally, there's a little note here that the E1s were phased out of service by early 1941 due to complaints about light armament, over 550 manufactured as E4 or later models during overhauls. So as you can see, there's not just your game data here, but actually a nice little chunk of historical data as well. So this is probably the premier fighter in 1930, September 1939, of just about anybody in Europe, at least. And they are going to be going up against the Wellington. So let's take a look at the British bombers. And here we have the Wellington Mark I. You see really nice line drawing here of it. Country's United Kingdom. Service entry date was October 1938. The class is M for medium. Most of your twin-engined aircraft are going to be the M class. Now, for twin-engine fighters like the P-38 or the BF-110, they are going to be class MF. And the victory points, you can see severe damage is worth 6. Destruction is worth 12. So each Wellington here worth almost twice as many points as each 109. Aircraft type is a twin-engine medium bomber. Engines, it has 2 Bristol Pegasus 18 engines with no fuel injection. No fuel injection is really more critical for fighter types than bombers because it really mainly just impacts whenever an aircraft does a negative G maneuver, and we're not going to be doing many negative G maneuvers in these Wellingtons. The engine power is between 815 to 1050 horsepower. It is a radial air-cooled engine. The air crew consists of a pilot, a bomb aimer. The FT means that the bomb aimer also mans the front turret. There is a navigator, a radio man, and a rear gunner who mans the rear turret here. Max speed 246 miles per hour at 15,000 feet. So we would expect to see the max speed down below of, let's see, that would be 4.5. So we'll see how that, see if that translates correctly here. Max ceiling numbers here, definitely not going to be an issue in this particular scenario. Defense factor of 6, you'll note that's one higher than the defense factor of 5 for the small single engine 109. But the size modifier is a +1 versus a +0. Damage factor, 18 and 28. So again, if we recall the 109's damage factor of 7 for severe damage, it takes 19 hits instead of 8 hits to shoot a Wellington Mark I up to the severe damage level, and it takes 29 hits to actually destroy the aircraft as opposed to only 11 hits to destroy the 109. Endurance 550, considerably greater than the 80 that the 109 has. Cockpit view is fair, and there are no blind areas. We can see the protection lines here. There's no cockpit protection, no fuel or engine protection. These protection numbers come into play with critical hits. And again, we will probably, hopefully, see that at some point during the scenario here. Climb, decel, and dive, excel. We've got those numbers here, and then we've got the weight and load limit for the payload that it carries. This is usually bombs, but in the case of, say, single-engine fighters carrying fuel tanks, extra fuel tanks, it could be a fuel tank. So we've got 4,500 pounds. And then we've got our weapon stations. There's bomb bay number 1. It is a, you can almost kind of make out the doors here for the bomb bay. And it can carry up to 4,500 pounds of bombs or auxiliary fuel tanks. Now, getting into the performance chart here, you can see the minimum speed is only 1.5. It's actually a little less than the 109's. Maximum speed is 4.5, and you can see that's at pretty much all the altitudes. So while the max speed was recorded at 15,000 feet, it's probably not much slower further down, as you can see here with the 4.5. Maximum dive speed of 6.5. So the 109s with their maximum speed, that's a maximum level speed of 6.0, are considerably faster than the Wellingtons here. And as we look across at the turn information, you can see that the Wellington isn't even able to do a brake turn or emergency turn rate turn. So they are going to be limited to tight turn rates and hard turn rates. And you can see the minimum speeds there for those. So clearly what this information is telling you is this is a less maneuverable, slower aircraft than the 109, which is what we would expect. With the power versus speed chart down here, important to note that this is per engine. So we're going to be in the very low band here. You can see they only get 1.5 acceleration points per engine compared to the 8 that the MO is getting off of its single engine at emergency power. And since there is no number after the slash here, the Wellington does not have an emergency power setting. Now, with both engines running, that does mean that the total acceleration available to the Wellington will be 3.0. And then we can see our banking and side slip numbers here. There is no engine acceleration available above 4.5 because, again, that's going to be its maximum speed at all altitudes. It would be possible for the aircraft to be going faster than 4.5 were it in a dive, and that's why we've got some numbers out here to the right. For the firepower, what does the Wellington have in terms of weaponry? Well, we mentioned a front turret and right turret previously. You can see in the front turret there is one .303 caliber Browning machine gun. It has 16 ammo. That's every time you fire, you're going to burn 1 ammo point, unless you do a long burst, which will consume 2 points of ammunition, or a half burst, which consumes only half a point of ammunition. Now, these are termed defensive guns because they are in a turret or manned by a crew member. They're not a fixed forward firing gun like the machine guns on the 109. And these defensive guns are limited to normal bursts only, so no long bursts and no half bursts from these weapons. And you can see the critical rating is the same as the MG-17 on the 109, which is kind of what you would expect from a rifle caliber machine gun at this point in the war. Now, the rear turret has two .303 caliber Brownings with 26 ammunition. The little asterisk here tells us that that the turret hydraulics are powered by the left engine. So if the left engine is knocked out, the turrets go out of action. That's not good. Vickers turrets had limited aiming angles for gunners. If firing at targets outside of the clock lines 11 to 1 for the front turret and 5 to 7 for the rear turret, then you add a plus 20 likelihood to any shots due to tracer only aiming. So again, we'll understand what likelihood means, and that plus numbers on likelihoods are bad and negatives are good when it comes to shooting and really everything else. Fighting wings, I would say, is generally, with the exception of the initiative rolls, is a system where you want to roll low. Rolling low is good, rolling high is generally bad. Now the gun attack factors, what can they put out? You can see we've got it broken down into the front turret and rear turret. Since they're armed the same, but the rear turret has twice as many machine guns, you can see the attack factors are essentially doubled. Again, max range of 5 hexes. Down here you can see where the weapon stations are. Bay 1 is located there in the center line of the aircraft. And so the firepower that the 109 has at, say, range 1 would be 18 from its 4 machine guns. The rear turret is only going to be firing back with 6 attack factors. The front turret with an even fewer 3 attack factors. So the 109s definitely have the edge when it comes to armament. Looking over here at the notes and variants very quickly, this is the initial production model, of which 183 were built. It equipped 8 squadrons by September 1939, which is when our scenario is occurring. Often the bomb aimer and navigator were also pilots, so you could roll a 6 or less on a D10 in order to see if they are pilot trained. There are engine fire extinguishers, which gives you a +2 to the first fire progress roll per engine. That's actually a good thing. Now, by late December 1939, which is after this scenario, the fuel protection becomes +1 as they started adding self-sealing fuel tanks. By February 1940, any remaining Mark 1s were replaced by Mark 1As, which are on a separate ADC in this 6-pack. All of these use 2 pitch props until March of 39, so reduce the total engine power by 0.5, but not to less than 0.5, and all rates of climb numbers by 100 feet per minute. We don't have to worry about this because starting in March 1939, you roll a D10 of 4 or less to get a constant speed prop conversion. And if so, you use the ADC as given. There's a -2 to the roll per month after March. Since this happens in September, you've got April, May, June, July, August. That's 5 months. -2 for each of those months would be a -10 to the roll, which guarantees that you are going to get a 4 or less. So the aircraft in this scenario will be equipped with the constant speed props, and we will use the ADC as printed. All the props, however, were non-feathering, which if you lose an engine, many aircraft of the time with constant speed propellers could feather the prop blades, which basically just turns them narrow edge on into the wind, which reduces drag. These Wellingtons are not equipped with that capability, so they will suffer a drag penalty should they lose an engine because they're unable to feather it. This also has an early bomb sight, which would factor into a mission where we were actually dropping bombs, but since the bombs have already been dropped before the start of the scenario, that is just kind of information only for us. Load limits, again, these aircraft are unloaded, but you can see that the bay is limited to 1,500 pounds with maximum internal fuel to get you that endurance of 550. So even though it's got a real good endurance up here of 550, the only way you're going to get that if you're carrying your max internal fuel is by limiting your bomb payload to 1,500 pounds instead of carrying the full 4,500 pounds. Now, for each 250 pounds or less of load greater than 1,000, you reduce the max endurance by 15 minutes. Again, a lot of this is pretty much almost all talking about the operational level scenarios where you're flying the mission from takeoff to touchdown. And then for each 50 minutes or less of endurance greater than 300, add 1 extra load point. This is not applicable to the auxiliary bay tank fuel. Now, the bay may carry up to 6 250-pound SBCs, which are small bomb containers, plus 6 250-pound bombs, or up to 18 250-pound bombs, 9 500-pound bombs, for 1,000-pound bombs or two 2,000-pound bombs, up to two 140 IG auxiliary fuel tanks, or any mix of these items, not to exceed 4,500 pounds, obviously. And then it gives you information on the auxiliary tanks that can be fitted into the bay. Finally, the defensive gun arcs. This is going to be important. We can see the front turret has an arc from the 10 o'clock line to the 2 o'clock line. There's a little asterisk there which references the note here on the firepower chart, where if it is outside of the 11 to 1, even though the turret can turn to 10 and 2, that those are, if the enemy aircraft is on the 10 o'clock line, it can be shot at, but it will suffer a plus 20 on the to hit likelihood. Then the 3 plus to 3 minus, this is the altitude above and below per hex of range out. So it basically, the clock lines here determine the angle off the nose that you can shoot at, and the altitude here basically gives you the elevation and depression limits of the guns. And you can see the right turret here is from the 4 o'clock to the 8 o'clock lines, again with the same restriction as the turret here, and with the same elevation and depression of plus 300 to minus 300. So with that, we've looked at the ADCs for the aircraft. We're a little bit more familiar now with the capabilities of each side, and I think we are ready to just jump right in with turn one and get this thing underway. Fighting Wings has rules covering 3 different scales of gameplay. The operational scale handles everything from takeoff to one or both forces sighting the other, and then everything from disengagement to touchdown. The tactical scale covers the maneuvering of the formations from initial sighting to engagement range, and once it's fights on, the combat scale takes over. Most of the published scenarios are, like today's scenario, combat scale only. Now, eventually, I'll do a playthrough of one or more scenarios that include the operational tactical scales, but for now, I wanted to start off smaller, and as this series grows, then kind of show off the whole of what Fighting Wings has to offer. And I will add, you could play only combat scale scenarios and still have a practically inexhaustible pool of fantastic gaming with Fighting Wings. Now, the combat scale turn has 3 phases: the initiative phase, movement phase, and combat phase. The initiative phase determines the order of movement for all aircraft. Fighting Wings does not use pre-plotted movement, unlike a lot of other tactical air combat games, and it's why Fighting Wings is a legitimate option for solo play. Aircraft move in order of agility class, from least agile to most agile. Then within each class, the order is determined by a 10-sided die roll. The first aircraft to move each turn are all of the U-class aircraft. That's uncontrolled aircraft that have stalled or are spinning, or whose pilot is incapacitated, perhaps from blacking out due to excessive G-forces. After all the U-class come the aircraft that are in rigid formations. These are referred to as X-class aircraft. This is almost always level bomber formations, much as you see like the American daylight heavy bombers or even medium bombers. Anybody that's flying level and locked into a rigid formation. The scenario special rules will indicate whether or not any of the aircraft in the scenario are restricted or considered to be in the rigid formation. After the rigid formation, you then get all of the heavy bombers, or the H classes. So think the 4-engine bombers like B-17s or B-29s. Then the medium bombers of M class, and that would be our Wellingtons today. Then finally come the F and L classes combined. F are the single-engine fighters, and L are the light bombers. So think like Dauntless dive bombers or Sturmovix. Now, since all of the aircraft are M class in this scenario, they will always have to move before any of the German aircraft. And since it usually doesn't matter which order friendly aircraft move in, we could, in practice, skip the initiative phase entirely in this scenario. But since I wanted to demonstrate how it works, we'll go through the process a couple of times. As you kind of get a feel for this, we may just kind of skip over that, or I'll sort of gloss over that and get right into the movement phase. But to see how the initiative phase works, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the flight logs. While Fighting Wings does not use pre-plotted movement, it does use these aircraft log sheets to record the starting position of the aircraft for each turn, as well as changes to its flight attitude and throttle, and calculations that then impact the change in altitude and speed for the aircraft on each turn, giving you a new ending speed and altitude, which is then recorded for the beginning of the next turn. So across the sheet here, each column represents one game turn, and then we've got all of the rows here with the various important bits of information that you're going to need in the course of calculating and updating the aircraft's position as it moves. The top line here is reserved for the initiative roll. So what we'll do, since we're determining initiative for the Wellingtons, we'll simply roll a d10 and record the roll. This is a good roll, in this case, for Wellington number 2 of a 9. That 9 is going to be recorded up there. I would roll for now Wellington number 1. I roll a 7 for Wellington number 1. And then finally, I roll another 7 for Wellington number 3. Now, in the case of a tie, the two aircraft that tied will roll again until one or the other beats the other one. But you don't make that roll until it comes their time in the turn to move. So you're not going to know necessarily at the beginning of the turn, you're not going to know at the end of the initiative phase which aircraft, if two or more are tied, are going to actually move until it's their turn to move in the turn, as that will perhaps impact some aircraft moving prior to them. Now, since we are at that point, it is Wellington 1 and Wellington 3 will be moving first since they're tied at 7. So the two of them would roll. And if we re-roll again, I end up with a 10 for Wellington 1 and an 8 for Wellington 3, which means Wellington 3 is actually going to be the first aircraft to move, followed by Wellington 1 and then finally Wellington 2 before we move on to the next agility class, which will be the German fighters. Now you can see here, we'll walk down the column here when I go to do the move for the aircraft. I did want to point out just a couple of things here on the right-hand side. Up top here, there's a place to record the pilot quality. You can see I've got regular here, as all of the air crew and German pilots are regular. And there's an initiative mod here. You've got recruit, green, regular, and veteran as far as experience levels go for pilots. Recruit pilots are going to suffer a -4 to all of their initiative rolls. Green, a -2. Regulars are 0, and veterans are a +1. So you can see here where the system is starting to hand the advantage to veteran pilots over less experienced pilots. By giving them an initiative advantage. It's not a guarantee, but it is an advantage, and one that we see borne out time and time again in the actual combat historically. Below that, we've got places to record what items are stored on which stations. If the bombers were loaded, for instance, we would record their bomb loads, where it is, when they're dropped. Place to record the number of hits taken, as well as any damage notes. The damage is going to come through the critical hits system. So there are two ways to damage an aircraft. You've got the sort of the general hits, which we looked at on the ADC. Each aircraft is rated for a number of sort of generic hits that it can take before it moves to severely damaged and then before it is destroyed. But then there's also the critical hits table, where the critical hits will get into specific systems that may be damaged or destroyed, and those could have bad effects on the aircraft. And so that's what the damage notes area is for here. And then finally, we've got a place to record the weapon groups and the ammunition for them. So what I should do here is probably put in the front turret and rear turret and the respective ammunition available for those, and then a place to track the shots that have been fired. And then down here, finally, endurance available and endurance used lost. This is going to come into play in your operational scale scenarios. So that's a quick look at the flight log. Let's go ahead and look at Wellington number 3, and we'll walk through the first movement of the first turn. Now, the first thing you need to do in your turn is figure out what it is you actually want to do this turn. Where do you want the aircraft to be? Now, ideally, you already have a pretty good idea of what that is from your previous turn because you've got some sort of plan put together. This is very much a system that will reward you having a plan rather than simply moving turn by turn by turn by turn and reacting to everything. You'll see the better players in this system will have a plan. They'll know how to execute that within the mechanics of the system, and they will end up having a better time of it than the players that are simply move and react, move and react, move and react. Now, due to the limitations of the medium with board games, with aerial games, the big problem is that we only get a two-dimensional representation. So one of the skills that you need to develop quickly is to be able to visualize the situation and what's going on in 3 dimensions, at least relative altitude, bank angle, and pitch attitude of the aircraft. What we have right now is Wellington number 3 here, along with the other 2 Wellingtons, are in a shallow dive, heading down for the sea. He's currently at 800 feet altitude. He's got the closest German fighter is 9 hexes off his port quarter. Each hex in Fighting Wings is 300 feet. Each game turn at the combat scale is 4 seconds, just to give you a little bit of an idea of scale and what's going on here. So you can have multiple aircraft in the same hex at the same altitude without necessarily causing a collision. Now, there is a risk of collision in certain circumstances, and we'll address those as they come up in various playthroughs. So with 9 hexes here, the fighters are still currently out of gun range. And for Wellington number 3, his goal is simply to survive. He's got to last 20 turns. And the best way to do that is to stay outside of gun range and not get shot at. Now, the best way to maintain your distance is basically heading in the opposite direction. So what I think number 3 here is going to do is going to want to make a turn to the right here and just start running away from the Germans. The Germans do have speed advantage over the Wellingtons, but it's not a huge speed advantage. Plus, the Wellington's best armament is the rear turret. So and by running directly away from the Germans, it's going to slow their overtaking rate, and hopefully it will expose them to defensive fire from the rear turret longer as they try to come up from behind. So what we're going to do is we know we want to kind of turn off here. They are facing to the west. The Germans are facing northwest. Again, we mentioned a 12 facing model here. So the hex spines are in play, the same as the full hexes. And you'll see as we go through movement how all of that works. But basically the hex spines that are vertical here, that are going straight up, that's the north heading. The hex side is north-northeast. The hex spine here is northeast. Then we have east on the hex side. Then we have southeast, south-southeast, south, and so on all the way around the circle till you get the 12 facings available in the game. So what the Wellington's probably going to do is make a slight turn here to a north-northwest heading. They are currently, as I said, in a shallow dive. Now we'll see when we get over to recording the move that if you're in a nose down or a nose up attitude, there are some mandatory altitude changes that are going to take place based on the aircraft's flight points that they have for the turn. In this instance, the Wellington has a mandatory altitude change of 200 feet down. So that's going to go from 800 to 600 without doing anything else. Now, if they continue that descent and use some of the flight points they have as vertical flight points as opposed to horizontal flight points, each vertical flight point will cause you to descend another 300 feet. If they were to take the 4 flight points they have, move 3 horizontally and 1 vertically, staying in their shallow dive, that would give them a mandatory descent of 200 feet, plus another 300 feet from using the vertical flight point. And they will have, at the end of your move, you have the option to do an optional altitude change, again, based on your attitude and the number of flight points that you have total in the movement. In this case, if they were to max out their maximum altitude descent here, that would leave them at 200 feet at the beginning of next turn in a shallow dive. The problem with that is if they're still at a speed of 4 or greater, they're going to have another 200-foot mandatory descent, and that is going to put them right into the water. So I don't think the Wellington can necessarily stay in the shallow dive. Or if they do, they're going to have to really minimize their descent rate in this turn, and then probably next turn they'll have to pull out of that shallow dive into a level attitude. Let's take a look and see, though, whether we want to continue in the shallow dive or maybe level out. And that's where the flight log is going to come in handy. So let's switch over to that, and you'll see how this is going to be a really handy tool in helping us calculate and figure out exactly where the Wellington's going to end up and what she's going to be doing. Here we have the flight log sheet for Wellington number 3, who is moving first in the turn. Every aircraft is going to have their own individual log sheet here. And you can see across the top we have the turns, and then each column is where we will record all of the relevant information for the move for that aircraft each turn. And you can see up top here we've got a space to note the initiative roll for the turn, and then we have the starting position information here. We're in start hex 3042, we're facing west. Starting altitude is 0.8, which is 800 feet, and our start speed is 4.0, which is roughly 200 miles per hour. We don't have any flight point carry from a previous turn. If we did, that would be noted here. Our angle of bank is wings level, and we also have no turn or maneuver carry, and I'll talk about these carries as we proceed. And our starting flight attitude is in a shallow dive. So that information is recorded here. We know where we're starting from, and then what we actually do this turn is going to be filled in down here and will allow us to record our starting position for turn 2 once we complete this move. As I mentioned, there is a very active online community for fighting wings, and there are always some play-by-email games that are going on. When over the years, there has evolved a kind of standardized format for submitting your moves when playing by email. And I found when I was learning the system that format actually was extremely helpful in giving me some structure as to how to approach my move. It helps me keep everything in mind that I've got to do during the turn and in a particular order that I found to be very helpful. And then so by constantly using that process, going through basically the same procedure step by step, it really did make the learning the game much easier. I was able to absorb things and sort of just by giving some structure to my thoughts. And so what I'm going to do is demonstrate that technique here, and rather than record stuff directly onto the log sheet here, we're going to use something else for the turn. Let's go ahead and look at that now. The play-by-email format is pretty compact, so I like to use these 3.5 by 5 index cards to write out my move as I'm putting it together. And the top line for the format will list the aircraft ID and all of its starting position information, hex number, facing, altitude, speed, and so forth. Now, since I've already got that recorded on the log sheet, I'm not going to bother with that here, and we'll just move on to the actual portion of the move. Now, the first thing when you are figuring out your move in Fighting Wings is to calculate your power setting. Power setting is going to determine how many acceleration points you get from your engines. And there are 4 different power settings you can choose from in the system. You've got idle, cruise, military power, and emergency power in some aircraft. Now, our Wellingtons, as we shall see, do not have emergency power, but I believe the 109s do. So we'll take a look at that when we start doing the 109 moves. Now, idle power is going to give you 0 acceleration points, and then in addition to that, your speed is going to immediately decrease 0.5 right at the beginning of your turn. So in this instance, if our Wellington number 3, who's flying along at speed 4.0, chooses idle power setting, they're going to get 0 acceleration points, but their speed will become 3.5. So instead of having 4 flight points for this turn, that will drop to 3 flight points with a half flight point carry. And again, we'll see how the carries work as we get into turns later in the game. The next power setting option is cruise. Now, cruise is from 0 to 1/3 of the military power that's listed on the chart. And when we look at the ADC at the power versus speed chart, you'll see a number listed there. That number is the maximum military power that is available for the aircraft. Military power then is going to be anything greater than 1/3 of that number up to all of it. And then if the aircraft has emergency power setting, there will be a slash and a number to the right of that. So let's take a look and see what kind of power we have available for the Wellington in this move. For that, we go to the ADC, and we're going to be looking here at the power versus speed chart. And you'll note this is per engine. It's a twin engine aircraft, so we're going to have to double whatever power setting we select here. You can see we're going to enter the chart at either with our altitude, which is 0.8, so that's going to put us on the 1 to 6. This is kind of technically 0 to 6. And then our current speed, which is 4.0. So that puts us in the first column here. We come down there, we see 1.5. This is the number of acceleration points available if we take the maximum military power setting for the aircraft this turn. If we were to do idle, we would get 0. If we were to do cruise, the most we could select would be 0.5. And then military gives us a choice of either 1.0 or 1.5. Now, since we've said the Wellington is planning on running from the 109s as fast as possible, we are going to want every point of acceleration we can squeeze out of those engines. So we'll take the full 1.5, we multiply that by 2 for our twin engines, and that's going to give us a total of 3 acceleration points. So I'm going to record that here. M for military power, and then 3 in parentheses for the number of acceleration points we get, because we could have set military power if I had decided to take military power and set it at just 1 instead of 1.5. We would have military power set, but we'd only be getting 2 acceleration points. And it does matter. The acceleration points are going to be important as far as speed changes, but the throttle setting as far as cruise, idle, military, etc., that does have an effect on some other mechanics or systems in the game. So that's why we record the type of throttle setting as well as the specific number of acceleration points we're going to be taking. Now, after getting our power setting, the next thing we need to look at is any potential transition changes. Transitions in fighting wings refers to pitch attitude changes. So this is either pulling your nose up or pushing your nose down. And to determine what transitions are available to us, we need to consult one of the 2 FATs in the game, the flight attitude transition table. We see we've got number 2 here and number 1 here. Table number 1 is for nose up pulls, and table number 2 is for nose down pushes. And we talked about the aircraft currently being in a shallow dive and discussing whether or not or how soon we're going to have to pull out of that dive. Now, looking at the FAT here, it looks a little complicated perhaps, but it's not that bad. You can see we've got an illustration of an aircraft in all 12 of the available pitch attitudes. This actually mirrors the 12 facing possibilities in the system, and it sort of reinforces the point that a transition is nothing more than a turn in the vertical plane versus a turn in the horizontal plane, and they're treated very similarly. You will use turn rates to determine what transitions are available, what rate of transition is available to you, just like you do use the turn rate to determine how quickly you can change facing in terms of flight points expended. So we're going to enter this chart with our starting pitch attitude, which is a shallow dive. Here are the available transitions that we could do in this move. We've got the turn rate, which is going to be the exact same turn rate as it would be for a horizontal turn. The number here is the number of steps that you will transition to at the end of the turn. So you can see we can do 1, 2, or 3 steps of transition. And what this means is if you do 1-step transition, you're going to move from shallow to level. 2 steps is going to go shallow to level to shallow climb. And then we've got, if you do an emergency turn rate, a real fast pitch up, you can get 3 steps. That's going to be shallow dive to level to shallow climb all the way into a steep climb. Although the emergency turn rate does have some risks involved with it, both to the aircraft and to the pilots. You will have to risk overstressing the aircraft and perhaps damaging a wing spar. And if your wing spar is already damaged, it may potentially snap the wing in half, and that's going to be a bad day. You also have to check for the pilot potentially blacking out. They call it G-lock. That's G-induced loss of consciousness. So emergency turns are there for just what it says, an emergency. That's not something you're going to be doing often during a combat. Now, to determine which of these transitions then are available to us, it's based again on speed, and we need to look at our aircraft performance chart real quickly here. Back on the ADC, we're going to be looking up here, and you can see we've got our turn rates. Now, the Wellington, being a medium bomber, can only do tight turn rates and hard turn rates. Brake turns and emergency turns, the aircraft just will not do it, cannot turn that quickly. So we know we can eliminate the emergency turn and the brake turn. So we're looking at either an easy rate transition, a tight turn transition, or a hard turn transition. And then it's going to depend again whether we want to go from a shallow dive and pull up into a shallow climb, or if we just want to level off. Now, I don't think we want to start a climb. Again, we are interested in running from these 109s and keeping them as far away from us for as long as possible. So we are going to pull out of the shallow dive, but we're just going to kind of shallow it out a little bit to a level pitch attitude. And again, keep in mind, when we say level, that doesn't necessarily mean it is perfectly level with a 0-degree pitch angle. There are 12 pitch attitudes. It's a 360-degree circle. A little math tells you that there's about 30 degrees worth of play within each of these pitch attitudes. So you could be in what the game calls a level pitch attitude. You could still be in a 10-degree nose up or 10-degree nose down attitude. And you'll see how that will allow you to, even though you're level, you do have the ability to climb or descend out of this attitude. So just because we level off now doesn't mean we aren't going to get any lower or can't get any lower than we currently are. We're just going to be doing it much more shallowly. So if we're going to level off, that means one step. So that eliminates the hard turn rate. So we have to really choose between either an easy turn rate transition or a tight turn transition. And the verbiage right here is going to tell you how you're going to split your flight points between horizontal flight points and vertical flight points in the move. That's what this chart is kind of giving you. And you can see here, if we choose the easy turn rate, which is a really gentle pitch up, a very slow pitch up, and thus the nose is going to be pointing down a little bit longer than it otherwise would if we were to do a tight turn pull on the transition. You can see that we've got one V for vertical flight point, and then a comma, and then no OC. This is no optional change, no, and the plus means climb. So there's no, when we pull out at the end of the move, you'll have an opportunity, and we'll look at this in just a moment. The next thing we'll do is kind of determine our altitude changes. Because you are pulling up so slowly, you're not going to be able to pull up enough. You're not be able to get that nose up. You're not going to have enough time in the 4 seconds to get the nose up to where you can actually start to climb a little bit. And the bold 1V means we must spend exactly one of our 4 flight points as a vertical flight point, which means the other 3 will be horizontal flight points, which will actually move us from hex to hex. Now, if we do the tight turn, we're still going to end up in a level attitude, and we've got an option here where we can spend 1 or 0 vertical flight points. So what this does is this is going to pull the nose up a little bit faster, so the aircraft is not descending as much, which means instead of spending that flight point to move down 300 feet in a hex, we'll actually be able to move horizontally another hex further out. And of course, what this does is we're not losing as much altitude. And the difference between the two is essentially going to be the number of deceleration points we incur, because every time we move the nose of the aircraft, whether we're turning it in the yaw axis or we're turning it in the pitch axis, that's going to incur deceleration points, which we will find out from the ADC in the aircraft performance chart. In this case, I think what we're going to end up doing is we're going to try and do a tight turn 1 to a level pitch attitude, and we will choose to spend 0 vertical flight points. So again, this is going to get us horizontally further from the pursuing 109s, and it's going to preserve a little bit more of our altitude. We're not going to drop. We're only at 800 feet. If we were to spend one flight point as a vertical flight point, that's 300 feet of descent, which that puts us at 500 feet right there. And then, of course, we're going to incur some mandatory uh, altitude change simply because we are in a shallow dive to start the turn. And again, we're going to see all this in just a minute as we move through this turn. I know this is sounding much more like a tutorial than a playthrough. That wasn't necessarily my original intention, but the system has a lot of moving parts. None of them individually are all that complex, and I know there are probably a lot of my viewers out there that aren't familiar with the system, but this is one of my top all-time favorite game systems. So getting into this and giving you a good idea of how things work, I think is going to be worth it. And of course, as not every turn is going to go into as deep a dive on every single little aspect. Once we've talked about setting the power, for instance, moving forward, it'll be much more, I'm going to choose this power. I may explain why I'm deciding to select a particular power or take a particular number of acceleration points versus another, but not having to get into sort of these in-depth explanations. But I think hopefully you guys are finding this interesting, particularly if you are unfamiliar with the system, and if you are a Fighting Wings fan and have played it and you catch me making any mistakes, please let me know in the comments below. Now, we've decided we're going to do a tight turn 1 transition. Let's see what that looks like on the move plot, as well as how much deceleration we're going to incur as a result of that. Now, to record the transition, we're going to do that next to our power setting. We're going to do a pull transition. So we'll note pull. It's going to be a tight turn, and it's going to be 1 step to a level pitch attitude. We've noted that right there. Now we're going to spell out our flight point split between horizontal and vertical flight points. We have 4 flight points because our starting speed is 4.0. We saw on the transition the fact that we can take either 1 or 0 as vertical flight points. We're going to go with 0. So what that means is we're just going to note 4 horizontal flight points. So we've got 4 horizontal flight points. Now that we've established our transition and our flight point split for the move, now we're going to look into our altitude changes. So there are 3 types of altitude changes you have each turn. You've got a mandatory change, and the mandatory change is based upon your starting speed and pitch attitude. So we look here at the flight charts, at the tables, at the standard altitude change table. You find your starting flight attitude here. We see it shallow. We're going to come across to the mandatory change column, and we see 1/2 of our total flight points rounded up. Now we've got 4 flight points. Half of that is 2. If we say had 4.5 flight points, or actually we wouldn't have 4.5 total flight points, we'd have a speed of 4.5. If we had 5 flight points, for instance, we would come over here to the fractional values table. We can see 5, and we come across to half. That's 2.5. This would tell us to round it up, so we would actually have a mandatory change of 300 feet. But we've got 4 flight points. Half of that you can see there is 2. And because we are in a dive attitude, either a shallow dive, steep dive, or vertical dive, that's going to be a loss of altitude. So we're going to descend 200 feet just from our mandatory altitude change. The next type of altitude change is a vertical flight point spent. For every vertical flight point you spend in a move, you are going to either climb 300 feet or descend 300 feet. Since we are doing 4 horizontal flight points, our vertical change is 0. And then finally, we have our optional change. This is based on your ending attitude. So the mandatory change is based on your starting flight attitude. The optional change is based on your ending flight attitude. And we can see if we come back to that standard altitude change table, now we are going to be in a level attitude at the end of the move, and we come over to the optional change column, and you can see we can climb or descend up to 1/4 of our total flight points rounded up. Again, since we have 4 flight points, we can either climb or descend 100 feet. And so it would be possible for us to, the mandatory change takes us down 200 feet. We've got no vertical flight point to 0. We could actually climb 100 feet if we wanted to, which means a total altitude change of only a 100-foot descent. I'm not going to do that, however. We're going to, I think, leave this at 0 for now. And what we see here is a total altitude change of 200 feet. Now you'll see some folks will give you that total out here just to the left. And I'll just note that here for those of us following along, since we'll be talking about the rest of the move here, and you'll see where this 200 feet comes in a little bit further down the road. So now we've established our transition, our flight point split, our power setting, and our altitude change. Now we get into the actual movement of the aircraft, and this is where we will plot out our various, how the aircraft is going to move throughout the turn, how we're going to spend these 4 horizontal flight points. Now, looking at the map, we can see the situation here. Wellington number 3 has decided he's going to try to put his tail towards the enemy and just outrun them. That's also going to give his rear gunner in the turret back there in the tail a nice field of fire, nice angles on the pursuing enemy fighters. So it's all a matter of how quickly we can get the nose turned and to a northwest heading. The 109s are currently in a northwesterly heading, so if we're going to match that and basically point our tail directly at them, we want to move from a west heading to a northwest heading. So to determine how many flight points it's going to take us of forward movement before we can get that facing change, we need to go back to the ADC. We're going to take a look at a couple of charts on the ADC. Now, the first thing we need to determine is which turn rates are available to us. And actually, we needed to do that for the transition as well. I didn't really mention that because we're going to talk about it right here. So in order to determine which of our turn rates are available to us, we have to again look at the aircraft performance chart here in the center of the ADC. Now, when we looked at the transition, you can see there's no information here for brake turn or emergency turn. The aircraft just will not do those. So we have a tight turn and a hard turn possibilities as far as turn rate. However, every turn rate for every aircraft in the game requires a certain amount of speed in order to be able to do that turn rate. And that is what's being shown right here. That speed is based upon your altitude. So we are in the very low band here, down at 800 feet. We're going to come across the bottom row. You can see it gives us our minimum speed of 1.5, our maximum level speed of 4.5, and our maximum dive speed of 6.5. The maximum dive speed is important because if an aircraft exceeds that maximum dive speed, they're in an unsafe dive and they could potentially damage their aircraft. The numbers here are giving us the minimum speed requirement in order to select that turn rate. You can see to do a tight turn requires a speed of 2.0, but to do a hard turn rate requires a speed of 2.5. Our current speed is 4.0, so we've got both of our turn rates available to us. And for our transition, we did a full transition of a tight turn. So the minimum speed for that is easily met. Now, the difference here between the 2 turn rates, there are going to be a couple of differences. First is the amount of deceleration points that are accrued for every facing change you make. You can see a tight turn will give us 2 deceleration points, while a hard turn gives us 3 deceleration points for each 30 degree of facing change or each step of transition change. These will also, the other difference between the 2 turn rates is going to be the number of flight points that need to be expended in between each facing change. And to find that out, we have to look at the flight table, specifically the aircraft turn rate chart. So having determined that we can do either of our turn rates, our final decision is going to be based on how much deceleration we are comfortable taking, as well as how quickly we want to get the nose turned to the new heading. Now, before you can turn an aircraft, you have to bank an aircraft. It's the lift vector which comes perpendicular to the wing's chord. Basically, For those of you who are non-pilots, you can think of the lift vector basically coming out of the top of the pilot's head. So, and it's that lift vector that actually turns the aircraft. It's very much you can kind of think of it almost like how you turn a bicycle. So you kind of lean a bicycle in order to turn it. Same thing with an airplane. You're going to lean an airplane to turn it. And I've always wondered if perhaps the Wright brothers, with their background in having their bicycle shop, sort of almost instinctually understood that when it came time for them to start designing their aircraft. Before you can turn, however, we've said you've got to bank the aircraft. And that's going to require time. That's the roll rate of the aircraft. That's expressed down here in this power versus speed chart with this banking flight points line. The amount of flight points required to bank the aircraft is dependent upon the speed of the aircraft. We are going 4.0, so we're going to look at this first column here, and you can see banking flight points, it says 2. That means we have to expend 2 flight points. They can be either horizontal or vertical, but we have to expend 2 flight points before we can roll to a new bank angle. And there are 6 different bank angles. You've got level, which is wings level. You got left bank, inverted left bank, inverted, which is basically the opposite of level. The aircraft is upside down with the wings level. Inverted right, and right bank. Now, we want to turn the aircraft to the right to go from west to northwest. So we're going to need to get the aircraft into either a right bank or an inverted right bank angle. Now, because this is a medium bomber, we're not going to go inverted. We're just going to get to the right bank. That's sufficient for our purposes. So you can see here, it's going to take us 2 flight points before we get into a right bank. And it's only after we achieve the right bank status that we're going to be able to spend flight points to actually make the nose turn. So of our 4 flight points, the first 2 are going to be spent simply rolling into the right bank before we can even start the turn. How many flight points then is it going to cost us in order to actually make that heading change? Let's take a look at the aircraft turn rate chart to find out. Now here we're looking at the aircraft turn rate chart. The way we're going to use this chart is we're going to enter over here with our aircraft speed. Now this is speed, not flight points. It's an important distinction. You see we have a speed of 4.0, which is going to put us on this 4.0 to 4.5 aircraft speed line. And then we're going to read across until we find the column corresponding to the turn rate that we have selected. Now you can see over here on the right-hand side, there's a miles per hour scale, which gives you an idea of what the speed, what does 4.0 equate to? It's about 200 miles an hour. So every flight point in the fighting wing system is roughly 50 miles per hour, and you can see that that's shown over here. And then for the sonic speed, you can see at what speed you start to get into the transonic and supersonic ranges. You don't find that very often with fighting wings because it primarily covers the World War II era, say the mid 30s to the mid 40s. You get a few jet aircraft in the system near the end of the time period, but most aircraft are not going. You'll have a couple that'll touch the transonic here, perhaps, but you really don't see many supersonic aircraft in these games. Their wings have usually departed the aircraft before they get to before they can break the sound barrier. So back to what we're looking at here. For our purposes, we're looking at speed 4.0. If we do an easy rate, which is always available to every aircraft, as you can see, it's going to take us 4 flight points to make that heading change. Now, we've just found out we have to spend the first 2 flight points just rolling into a right bank, which leaves us 2 flight points to actually make the heading change. So if we were to select the easy rate, we would not be able to get the aircraft's nose turned this turn. We would be able, those 2 flight points that we spend turning would carry over to the next turn. And if we continue that easy turn rate, then in the following turn, we could spend 2 more flight points to fulfill this 4-point requirement and then turn the nose of the aircraft. The advantage of doing an easy turn is the number of deceleration points you incur is 1/2 of what's listed on the ADC for a tight turn rate. So instead of 2, we would only suffer 1 deceleration point. Going over to the tight turn column, you can see it's going to take 3 flight points in order to make that heading change. Again, this is not going to be able to allow us to make the heading change this turn, but we would be able to make it with after the first flight point expended of next turn. And then if we choose the hard turn rate, you can see at speed 4 it requires 2 flight points to be expended to turn the nose of the aircraft. So that would allow us to get the nose heading in the northwest direction this turn. So it's again, these are the choices you're looking at making: is how quickly do I want to get this thing pointed directly away from the enemy fighters, and am I willing to accept that amount of deceleration? Because again, the more you turn the aircraft, the more your deceleration you're going to accrue deceleration. The aircraft is going to slow down. That's kind of the last thing we want right now because we are running for our lives. However, I do think in this instance, it's going to be worth it to take the hard turn rate and get the nose pointed to the northwest by the end of this move. The fighters are coming in fast, not as fast as they could, but they'll be on us pretty quickly, I think, even with the turn away. So rather than in order to maximize our ability to sort of stretch out that distance and increase the time that they're going to be exposed, hopefully, to our rear turret gunners' defensive fire, let's get the aircraft's nose turned right now. So we're going to take the hard turn rate. You can see that's 2 flight points. So now we know kind of what we're going to be doing. We're going to be flying straight ahead for 2 horizontal flight points, which will then put us in a right bank, and then we're going to have to fly forward another 2 hexes before we are able to then turn the nose at the very end of our move to the heading of northwest. Let's see what that looks like and how we're going to notate that on the move in the move format. Now, for readability purposes, I like to break out each portion of the move on a separate line. So the first portion that we talked about is we're going to have to go forward 2 hexes horizontally, so that's 2H, and we're going to spend both of those rolling to the right. Now, we saw from the ADC that it requires 2 flight points in order to make a bank change in the Wellington at our current speed. So with those 2 hexes, we move forward. That's going to be 2 of the 2 required to roll right, and that will put us in a right bank angle. The next portion of the move, we're going to then fly another 2 hexes forward, and with the hard turn rate, we require 2 flight points to be expended. We got that off of the turn rate chart. That's 2 of 2 for a hard turn to the right to a heading of northwest. That's the move then plotted. Now, if we were doing this play by email, the next line down here would be our acceleration deceleration line showing the ultimate speed change. However, we're going to do that on the log sheet as we kind of walk through and step that out. So what I've managed to do here is put together my move, hopefully in a way that we understand what's happening. Just to recap here, we're taking full military power, which is going to give us 3 acceleration points. We're going to do a pull transition at the tight turn rate of 1 step to level. That's going to give us 4 horizontal flight points. Our altitude change, our mandatory change, is a 200-foot descent. We're expending no vertical flight points, so 0 there. And we've with our optional flight change, we've decided not to take any optional altitude change, which gives us a net altitude change of a 200-foot descent. For the move itself, it's 2 hexes forward to a right bank, and what that looks like on the tabletop, we can come right over here. We've got tail end Charlie here. He's going to go 2 hexes forward. He is now in a right bank, and then we're going to go forward another 2 hexes, and then we will be able to make that 30-degree change to northwest, and he is going to end his move in that hex at that position. We will record all of that data on the log sheet, and then that will finish Wellington number 3's first move. Let's go ahead and look at the log sheet. This is where we'll run through the speed change calculations and show you how we log the end position, which then becomes the starting position information for turn 2. Looking back at the log sheet, you can see we've got Wellington Mark 1 number 3 here. We've got our starting position information recorded here. So we're going to come down to this transition rate and steps. And if you remember, we did a pull transition of a tight turn rate of 1 step. What is our horizontal flight point, vertical flight point split? It's 4 horizontal, no vertical. This, you see how this is kind of tying into the format we just went through as we were plotting out the move. Now, mandatory altitude change. We said that's a 200-foot descent. That's -2. Vertical flight point altitude change is 0, and the optional is 0. So our net altitude change is -2. Now we come to our throttle setting. Our throttle setting is going to be military throttle setting with 3 points of acceleration. We have no acceleration carried. The power acceleration we can put here, I suppose. Sorry about that. And then our dive and dive attitude acceleration. With the airplane pointed nose down, we will get some acceleration just from the fact that the aircraft is pointed nose down. And that is found on every ADC under climb dive acceleration. Here you can see it is 1.0. So we will pick up 1 dive attitude acceleration. So our total acceleration for the turn is going to be, this is the dive and dive attitude. We're going to put that into the same box here. So we get 1 for the dive attitude. However, we have a 200-foot descent. That is going to give us some acceleration as we give up altitude. And to find out how much acceleration, we look at the dive, accel, and climb decel table. You're going to enter this with our current speed of 4, which is equal to or greater than 3.5, but it's not equal to or greater than 5. So 3.5 line, as we read across, acceleration, deceleration per increment. So increment is every 100 feet step. It's 1.5. Now our total descent was 200 feet. So we take 1.5 times 2 increments. That's going to be 3. So we get 3 acceleration from the dive plus 1 from the dive attitude, gives us a total of 4 dive and dive attitude acceleration. Now we can add up our total acceleration here is 7. So we've got 7 points of acceleration. Now though, we have to take our deceleration off of that. And first line here is any decel carry from a previous turn. We don't have any of that. Transition decel. We did a tight turn transition and our ADC told us we're going to suffer 2 points of decel for every step of transition. Well, we only did 1 step to level, so that's going to be 2 points of deceleration from the transition. Climb and climb attitude decel. This works just like the dive here. We did not climb at all, and we're not. The nose was not pointing up at the start of the turn, so there's nothing there. Inverted and miscellaneous deceleration. We're not going to have any of that. That could be things like overspeed deceleration and so forth. Turn rate deceleration. Now we come back to the hard turn rate that we did. We turned 1 facing, so that's only 1 incurrence of the deceleration. For the hard turn rate, it's 3 decel. So we're going to get 3 because of the hard turn rate. Maneuver deceleration. Maneuver, this refers specifically to things like slips, skids, or snap rolls. And we did none of those, so there's no deceleration incurred for that, and there's no overspeed deceleration here. There should be, however, a transition credit. So what that is when you do a pull transition, you are able to take half of the deceleration that you incur from your pull transition, and you can subtract that from the deceleration incurred from a normal turn. If you do a push transition, you can apply half of the deceleration from the push transition to a negative G turn, which is basically sort of turning opposite the angle that your wings are banked. So rather than take the full 3 points of deceleration from our turn rate, we are able to take half of this 2, which would be 1, and subtract it from the 3. So that would lower our deceleration from our turn to a total of 2. Now we add our total deceleration, and we've got 2 and 2 is 4. Acceleration minus deceleration, 7 minus 4 is 3. Net speed change, there's no net speed change. It requires 5 points. For every 5 points of acceleration, you will increase your speed 0.5. For every 5 points of deceleration, net deceleration and net acceleration, you will slow down 0.5. So we have no speed change. However, these 3 points of acceleration are not lost. We are going to carry those over to the next turn. So having calculated out or recorded all of our speed, acceleration, deceleration changes, we've moved the aircraft on the map, we can now come up here to turn 2 in the next column and record the start position for turn 2, which is our ending position of turn 1. So we are currently now in hex 3038, and that tracks because we started in 3042 and we went 4 hexes due west. So we would expect to be here. Our facing, however, is now to the northwest. Our starting altitude, we were in 0.8, but we descended 200 feet. So we are now at 0.6 in our altitude. And we said that we had only 3 points of net acceleration, which is not enough to change our speed in either direction. So our start speed remains 4.0. We do not have a half flight point carry because we spent all 4 of our flight points. Our bank angle is now a right bank. Turn and maneuver carry, we were able to complete our hard turn to northwest, so we don't carry any of that. Our starting flight attitude, however, has come nose up to level. And as we look down here, we've got transition rate. This is going to be starting for the next turn, so we'll get to that on turn 2. However, if we come down a little bit further to the throttle, we have our XL carry. We are carrying 3 acceleration from this turn. We're going to note that there, which means that's going to add to any power settings we put in next turn, as well as any potential dive or dive attitude acceleration. So the 3 points, you never lose acceleration or deceleration. Well, there are 1 or 2 situations which we probably won't see, but we could. Generally speaking, you never lose acceleration or deceleration points. Those are always going to carry over, just like you never lose half flight points. And you'll see this again as we get further into this. But that is then the first move of turn 1 for Wellington number 3. And now we're going to move on to the next Wellington's move, which will be, I believe, Wellington number 2. So this move will not take nearly as long because a lot of this is going to be very similar to what we've talked about here. So we'll just be running through the steps and I'll show you how that works. So let's get moving with the next bomber to move. Next up is Wellington number 1, lead Wellington here. Now, Wellingtons 1 and 2, unlike Wellington 3, are not prohibited or restricted from entering the clouds. And historically, a great way to escape the bad guys that are pursuing you was to duck into the clouds. The visibility there is horrible, and you'd be able to make some turns, climbs, descents, and pop out the other side, hopefully shake them off your tail. In this scenario, we have a cloud deck at 1,500 feet. That's 700 feet above where the Wellingtons currently are. We also have a cloud bank located to the southwest down here. If the Wellingtons can make it to the cloud bank here, they will come off the map and they will have escaped and gotten away. So there's 2 options they've got. They can either try and climb that 700 feet into the overhead cloud deck and escape that way, or they can go for the cloud bank out there to the southwest. Now, Wellington does not have a fantastic climb rate. Average rate of climb is going to be probably about 800 feet per minute. They are 700 feet away from the cloud deck at this point, so figure a full minute to climb into the cloud deck. At 4 seconds per turn, that's going to take them about 15 turns to make it up into that cloud deck. That's a long time being exposed to enemy fire, and they're not going to be able to maneuver very much in the climb. So I think Wellingtons 1 and 2 are going to instead try to make a turn and make a run for the relatively nearby cloud bank here. So while Wellington number 3 is turning to the right and turning to the northwest to put the Germans on its tail and try and just outrun them this way, the other two are going to make a left turn and try and make a beeline for the cloud bank there. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and plot Wellington number 1's move. So going back to our trusty 3x5 here to sort of plot out the move, we're going to do our throttle setting. We're going to again take a maximum military power setting that gives us 1.5 acceleration per engine for a total of 3. All of the Wellingtons are just gonna firewall it. They've got literally balls to the wall. They are trying to squeeze every ounce of power out of their engines to get their maximum forward speed in order to run to safety. I do think that like Wellington number 3, Wellington number 1 is going to do a pull transition of a tight turn pull of 1 step to a level attitude, which will give him 4 horizontal flight points, which means our altitude change should look exactly the same. I think we will hold off on taking any optional change as well to minimize our descent here. By minimizing the rate of descent, what we're able to do is maximize the number of turns that we can take some optional descent, because remember, even in level flight, you can climb or descend up to 1/4 of your flight points, which will give us a little bit of dive acceleration every turn. So we'll slowly start to hopefully speed up and again get to safety faster. But we can do that over more turns if we minimize the amount of altitude we're giving up right now. So then this move is going to look almost identical to Wellington number 3's move, except it's going to be in the opposite direction. So we're going to have to turn to the left, which means we're going to go 2 hexes forward. That's going to satisfy the 2 hex requirement for our bank, but we're going to roll left this time to a left bank angle, and then we will go 2 more hexes forward, which will again satisfy the 2 hex requirement for a hard turn rate, which is going to turn us in this case to southwest instead of northwest. So we've got the move plotted there, and on the map, what that's going to look like is 2 hexes forward horizontally. That puts us into a left bank now, and then we'll go 2 more hexes forward and make the left turn to a southwest heading. Now, one thing to keep in mind, had the move taken the aircraft through the hex where there was another aircraft, even if they're at the same altitude, there's no collision risk, generally speaking, because all of this movement is happening simultaneously or nearly. So with the fighting wing system, what the fighting wing system focuses on is where the aircraft is at the start of the turn, where the aircraft is at the end of the turn, just before combat. What happens in between, a lot of that's been abstracted out, and we don't have to worry about the details. The one major exception to that would be perhaps head-on attacks, but even then you can pass through the hex no problem. It really becomes an issue if you end up in the same hex at the same altitude. So hopefully we won't see that happening in this game, but you never know. I've seen numerous mid-air collisions in games that I've played over the years. So there's Wellington number 1's move. Let's record the information on the log sheet, and then we can move on to Wellington number 2's move. All right, we come into the column 1 here, transition rate and steps. That was a tight turn of 1 step, which gives us 4 horizontal and no vertical flight points. Our mandatory altitude change was a 200-foot descent. We have no VFP change and no optional change, giving us a net altitude change of 200 feet. The throttle we selected was military. We had no acceleration carry. That gives us 3 points of power acceleration. And again, we had 1 point of acceleration from our dive attitude, and we descended 200 feet. Each of those two increments gave us 1.5 in acceleration. So that's a total of 4 dive and dive attitude acceleration. We add this column up here, and we get 7 for our total acceleration. We had no decel carry. Our transition deceleration was 2. Our climb and climb attitude deceleration was 0. Same with our inverted. Our turn rate, again, the hard turn rate gave us 3 deceleration points. However, because we also did a pull transition, we get a credit of half of this that can be applied to that. So that's 1 from the 3 gives us a total of 2 for our turn rate deceleration. We did no maneuvers and we are not over speeding. So our total deceleration is 4, which means our net XL decel is plus 3 and gives us no speed change. So recording that for turn 2, you can see we are in hex 3134 now. We are going southwest. Our start altitude, this guy's at 400 feet. All right, our start altitude is 0.2, so it's a good thing we pulled up, and because we don't have nearly as much altitude to spare as Wellington 3, but we are at 200 feet now, coming down just about to wave tops. Our start speed is going to be 4.0, and we have no half flight point carry. Our angle of bank is now a left bank. We have no turn or maneuver carry, and we are in a level attitude. And then one last thing is our XL carry down here. We are carrying 3 points of acceleration into the next turn. And that is Wellington number 1's move recorded, which means we can now move on to Wellington number 3 and finish up the last of the bombers. You can see Wellington number 2 here. He is going to be following his lead, Wellington number 1. They're going to make that turn to the left and head for that cloud bank. They're basically going to do the exact same move, I think. Yeah, they will. So what we're going to do is what we see here. They're going to take a military power at full military power, gives them 3. They're going to pull into a level attitude. They are starting at 600 feet. So what we had is we had the lead at 400 feet, 2 was at 600, and 3 was at 800. So they were kind of stepped back about 200 feet above one another. So with that, he's got 4 horizontal move points. He's going to have that mandatory descent of 200 feet, and that's all he's going to take. He'll do 2, move forward 2 to roll into a left bank. So that's 1, 2. There's his left bank. And then with the hard turn rate, he's going to go forward another 2, and he's going to turn to the southwest. So that is the ending position of the Wellingtons, and you can see the first and second are pointed in the general direction of the cloud bank here, and they are sort of cutting across the approach angle of the 109s behind them. So we need just now to record the information for that move on the log sheet for number 3, and we will be done with the Wellingtons, and we will be on to doing the 109's first move. So again, starting, that's Wellington 3, Wellington 1. Let me find the right, here he is, the right log sheet here. And you can see we are tight turn rate of 1. That's going to give us 4 and 0. Mandatory altitude, got nothing here, nothing here. So that's a net altitude of -2. We're doing military, no carry, 3 acceleration. Again, it's going to be 4, so total acceleration of 7. No decel carry. Transition decel is 2. No climb, no inverted. Turn rate decel is going to be 2 with the 1 point credit again. No maneuver, no overspeed, so we got 4 here. 7 minus 4 is going to give us a net acceleration of 3 points, which is no speed change, as you can see here. And then we'll record the starting position, which is 3226 southwest, 400 feet, speed 4.0, no flight point carry, bank angle is left bank, no turn carry, and we are in a level attitude. And last but not least, we're going to record our acceleration carry of 3. And that, so you can see that first move, it took a while to walk through that. These are, the Wellington's moves are relatively simple moves. We just simply pulled the nose up a little bit and then rolled into a bank and a turn as they try to head for safety. The first move may have seemed like a lot, but I wanted to go through that slowly and kind of explain everything that's going on so that we can then, as we get into further moves, things will move quickly like you saw with both of the other Wellingtons. The game, you can really get through a move in just a few minutes if it's not terribly complicated. Other times you may be looking at different permutations. Sometimes you'll have to make some hard decisions as to the turn rate you're using, maybe even your power setting, your altitude gain or loss as it may be. But the game does have the potential to move along at more than a glacial pace. So the first 109 move is probably going to be a little bit on the slower side, as we're looking at not only a new aircraft, but a new type of aircraft in a single seat fighter. You'll see it's more maneuverable than the Wellingtons are, as you would expect, but I don't think it's going to be too terribly long, and we're going to get rolling and get into this game and see if the Germans can in fact shoot down more than, well, if they can shoot down any of the Wellingtons, and if they can get at least two of them, which I think they're going to need in order to win the scenario. So without any further delay, let's take a look at the first of the 109s that's going to move. And we see the four 109s coming in from the southeast here. The lead pair is at 1,200 feet and the trailing pair is at 1,400 feet. So they are anywhere from 600 feet to 1,000 feet above the Wellingtons here. They're also coming in at speed 6.0. So right now they are coming in about 300 miles an hour, about 100 miles an hour faster than the Wellingtons, but that only translates to 2 flight points more than the Wellingtons. And you can see there's a fair distance here. We've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, about 16 hexes out to Wellingtons 1 and 2, which if they were flying directly away from, that's 8 turns just to kind of get up to where they are. Now, the Wellingtons, however, have turned, at least these two have turned, and they're going to be heading for the cloud bank over there, which actually kind of does the 109s a favor because they'll be able to cut the corner, if you will. So they'll make a turn here to the left and be able to close that distance a little more rapidly. But still, it's not like they're going to have a lot of time to shoot at the first two Wellingtons before they get to the safety of the clouds. And I think what we're going to do is concentrate our firepower. With the 4 airplanes, we have a tactical choice here of splitting up and having each of the German fighters go after a different bomber and maybe doubling up on one of them. The problem with that is these German 109s, these are E1s, which means they have no cannons. They are only armed with 4 7.9 millimeter machine guns. So their firepower is not that great. And the Wellington, being a medium bomber, can take a fair amount of punishment. So it's going to take more than a couple of shots to bring the Wellingtons down, barring a lucky critical hit. So with that in mind, I think the Germans are going to pick one of the Wellingtons and they are going to try and concentrate their firepower on that Wellington and bring it down. And with 1 and 2 being the Wellingtons that are most likely to disappear first, we're gonna focus on going after one of the 2 lead Wellingtons with our initial runs here, and then see how the fight develops, see where the aircraft end up, and then we've got a little more time to go after Wellington 3 because Wellington 3 is the one that has to survive on map the full 20 turns. So with that in mind, we need to figure out what exactly we're going to do. It's not going to be that difficult. We're got to be making a beeline for the bad guys. However, one thing to keep in mind is that a weakness in these early Wellingtons is their beam defense. They have a forward turret in the nose and they have a rear turret in the tail, but the traverse on those turrets is limited, and so there's no defensive fire that they can put out to their 3 and 9 o'clock lines. Actually, it's a little bit wider than that. So for the Germans, they can basically, if they make a beam attack coming in from the side there, they will be able to avoid the defensive fire from their target, which is always a good thing. If you can shoot at the bad guys without them shooting back at you, that's what you want to do. Now that's going to be offset a little bit by making the 109's shots a little more difficult because of the deflection shooting that's going to be involved. It's a lot easier to get in on somebody's tail and shoot him with a very low deflection. But in this instance, they would be taking return fire from that rear turret. And while it's not a particularly powerful turret, if you can avoid getting shot at, that's always a good thing. So the Germans are going to look to make a beam attack, and the two Wellingtons here have actually made that a little bit easier by starting a turn. You can see they're starting to expose their beam to the 109. So I think the 109s are going to come in and just make a left turn here to like a westerly heading and look to head these guys off before they get to the clouds. Hopefully, they probably will only have time enough for one pass before both of those bombers get into the clouds. But if we have 4 109s making a pass at a single Wellington, if the shots are good enough, we may be able to bring one down before they can escape. And then we'll turn our attention to Wellington number 3. So with that in mind, let's take a look and see what we're going to do with the specifics of the moves. Now, I didn't roll initiative for the Germans, and technically in this scenario, there's no need to ever roll initiative because the British aircraft are all M-class aircraft, which all have to move before any of the F-class aircraft, which all of the Germans are. And it doesn't really matter when if you've got two friendly aircraft, it doesn't matter which one moves prior to the other one. Now, one thing to note too about the Germans is the Germans are all in formation. It is a loose formation, and to be considered in formation, a wingman must be within 6 hexes of his leader, which is the number 1 guy here. He has to be within 600 feet above or below, and his facing has to be within 60 degrees of the leader's facing. And you can see we are with these guys at 1200 and these guys at 1400. Everybody's within the altitude, meets the altitude parameter. They're all facing the same direction, so they're within the facing parameter. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, even number 4 back here can be considered in formation with number 1 up there because he's within the lateral distance parameter. So with that, if a wingman can claim in formation status, then on the initiative rolls, he has the choice of taking the better of either his own initiative roll if he rolls really well, or he can take his leader's initiative if his leader ends up rolling better than he does. In that case, if he takes his leader's initiative, what will happen is the leader will move, and then he will move immediately after the leader moves. So for that reason, we don't really have to mess around with initiative at all. I wanted to kind of show you a little bit how it worked on the beginning of the turn here. So with the Germans, we're just going to go through these guys 1, 2, 3, and then 4. So let's start off with the German lead right here at the head of the pack. And back to our trusty index card here. I'm just going to put number 1 up here in the corner just so that we know which fighter we're actually whose move we're doing right now. So we're starting with number 1, and the first thing we're going to do is take a look at the power setting. So coming over to the power versus speed chart right here, you can see now we've got number/number. So the 109s do in fact have emergency power available. The max military setting is to the left of the slash, and the emergency power available is to the right. Now, there's no downside to being in emergency power every single turn. Some aircraft, that is an issue, and if so, there will be some notes right down here on the ADC telling you about that. So for our purposes, if the 109s want to be in emergency power every single turn this game, they can do that without any downside. So how much acceleration are we going to get? Now, we want to close the distance on these Wellingtons as quickly as possible. So we're going to be taking every ounce of power out of the engine we can. That means we're going to go with our emergency setting. Our current speed is 6.0. So that's going to put us in the second column here. As we come down to the bottom, very low band here that we are in altitude-wise, you can see Military power gives us 4, emergency power gives us 5. So we're going to do emergency power setting and take 5 acceleration points. Now, before we leave the table, there's 2 other things we have to sort of keep in mind. First is what our maximum speed is. Our maximum level speed at this altitude is 6.0. We are currently at 6.0. If your start speed exceeds your maximum level speed, then you will get 0 acceleration points from your engines no matter what your power setting is. It's still important to choose a power setting because the power setting determines what your maximum level speed is, and that in turn will impact any potential overspeed, how much deceleration you take from your overspeed. So while you're not getting acceleration out of a high power setting if you are faster than your maximum level speed, you will be decelerating more slowly, if that makes sense. So we, however, are right at our maximum speed, so we will get our 5 points of acceleration here from our emergency power setting. The other thing we want to look before we set aside the ADC is which turn rates we are available to us at our current speed. And you can see here coming across the bottom row, all the way up to emergency turns, the minimum speed requirement for emergency turn is 5.5. And we therefore have every turn rate available to us. So having looked at that, let's go ahead and note down here that we are going to be doing emergency power, and we're going to get 5 points out of that. Now let's take a look and figure out if we want to do any transition. And to do that, we're going to go back to the FAT. All right, we've got the FAT here in front of us again. We've got number 1 for the pull transitions up top here and number 2 for the push transitions. Now, all of the German fighters are starting out in level attitude. So that would be either here or here, depending upon which FAT we're going to use. The bombers are below us. So if we're going to get in a position to where we can shoot at them, we've got to start descending, or at least get our nose pointed down. Since we are upright in a level attitude, we can't do a pull transition because that's just going to pull the nose up. Well, we could do a pull transition, but we'd end up having to do a loop to get all the way around to a shallow descent or a steep descent here. That's going to take a while, and that's going the long way around. Instead, we're going to do a push transition. So we're just going to push the stick forward a little bit and nudge the nose down into a dive. Now, do we want to do a shallow dive, a steep dive, a vertical dive? We're not that high. We're only 1,200 feet altitude here. And we're only, what that puts us, like I said, anywhere between 600 to 1,000 feet above the Wellingtons. The Wellingtons don't have much further they can descend. So I don't think we have to necessarily push over into a vertical or steep dive. I think it's sufficient to get into a shallow dive here, and then we'll be able to adjust that dive as we close with the Wellingtons. Going into the dive will also allow us to exceed our max level speed and up to our maximum dive speed, which is 9.5, which is considerably faster than what we're able to maintain in level flight. So with that in mind, we're going to look at FAT number 2 here, the nose down pushes. And you can see we've got a free transition, an easy transition, tight turn, hard turn, or brake turn. That's going to give us 1, 2, or 3 steps of attitude change. So we can go 1 step puts us in shallow dive, 2 to steep dive, 3 takes us all the way to a vertical dive. We've already ruled out vertical dive, and I think we can probably rule out the steep dive as well. So let's just push over into a shallow dive, which means we're either going to be doing it with a free transition, free meaning there's no deceleration cost incurred. Basically, it's a really gentle, just letting the nose drop rather than trying to push it over and incur any deceleration as a result. Or we could do an easy rate. And the difference between the two, so the free would cost us 0 deceleration. If we do the easy rate, it's going to be half of our tight turn rate. And if we go back to our performance chart very quickly here, you can see the deceleration for doing a tight turn rate is 3. Half of that would be 1.5. So we would be incurring 1.5 decel points if we did the easy transition as opposed to the free. What does that look like in terms of horizontal vertical flight point split? Well, if we do the free, since it's such a gradual dropping of the nose, all of our flight points would be horizontal flight points. So we'd be moving 6 hexes forward across the map. If we pushed with the easy, all of them minus 1 is horizontal, and then we would do exactly 1 vertical at the end. So that would be 5 forward and 1 vertical, which would add 300 feet to our descent. Now our mandatory altitude change, as we'll see in a moment, is going to be 0 because our starting attitude is level. We've got maybe say 1,000 feet to catch the 1,000 feet of altitude to make up to get down to where the Wellingtons are. Do we want to get going like right now and get the nose over and start that descent, or do we want to not take it all out right now and just let the altitude descent come a little more gently? Well, you know what? Let's see what happens. Let's get the nose over and start down, because we can always pull out of the dive, shallow out, and get to a level attitude once we get down low enough. I'd rather do that. And it's not like we're going to get below the Wellingtons, because it looks like they're running right for the deck. So you can always, if you do get below the target, you can always pull up rather than missing it by flying over the top. So I think we're going to have the leader at least do an easy 1 push to a shallow dive. Now you see this NG notation here next to the tight turn, hard turn, and brake turn rates. What that means is that indicates that it is a negative G transition. If you do a negative G transition, that prevents you from doing any normal turns. You can do an NG turn, which turns you in the opposite direction of your bank, but most normal banks, you're going to turn in the direction that you're banked. That's the other sort of portion of this turn. Not only do we have to get the nose down, but we're also going to have to make a turn, because the Wellingtons are now running sort of across our nose from right to left. We're going to have to turn to the left to try and cut them off. So we don't necessarily want to shove the nose down so quickly that we get into an negative G situation where we then cannot make that turn to the left. And you'll see the 109 will hopefully end up being a little more maneuverable than the Wellingtons when we get into this. That's what we're expecting, given the nature of the small single-seat fighter versus a twin-engine bomber. So having decided on our transition, we're done here. We're going to do that easy 1. That's going to give us all minus 1, so that's going to be 5 horizontal and 1 vertical. All right, recording the transition for the turn, we are going to push at the easy rate 1 step to a shallow dive, and we determine that's going to give us 5 horizontal flight points and 1 vertical flight point. Next line is our altitude changes. Mandatory altitude change. Go back to our standard altitude change table. You can see we start out level. That is going to be none. So we're going to write 0 here. Next, vertical flight point changes. We have 1 vertical flight point here, so we know we're going to descend 300 feet for that. And now, any optional changes. We look at the chart here, we're going to end up in the shallow attitude, which is up to 1/3 of our total flight points, rounding down. We have 6 total flight points. 1/3 of that would be 200 feet. That is going to give us another 200. If we take that max, that would put us at what? That would put us at 500. Coming down from 1,200 is going to be 700 feet, and we're going to be a ways out yet. You know what? I don't think we need to necessarily take any of that optional altitude change right now. Let's just leave it there. We're going to have, it's going to be a couple of 3 turns before we are close enough to really get a shot off at them. And we'd like to be able to maybe stay in the dive and keep the speed up rather than starting to slow back to speed of 6. Because hopefully with this move, we'll be able to accelerate a little bit more and close the distance faster. So no optional change here for the leader, at least. That we may do something different with the trailing pair, and we'll see when we get to them. Now we've got to look at how we're going to spend these 5 flight points. And I mentioned the fact that we do want to start a turn to the left, which means since our starting bank attitude is a right bank, we're going to have to roll right bank. That's what it says. Let me just double check the start position here. Yeah, as a matter of fact, all the Germans are in right banks, which means they're banked the wrong way. So we are going to have to get from a right bank to either an inverted left or left bank in order to start that left turn to go after these Wellingtons. So that throws a little wrinkle into things. Let's take a look and see how quickly we can roll. Well, we're looking at the power versus speed chart, specifically the banking flight point line. Our speed is 6.0, so we're on the middle column, or the second column in here, and you can see it's going to require 3 flight points to be expended in order to roll the aircraft 1 bank angle. And we're going to be rolling to the left. We're going to go from right bank to level, and then we have to go from level to left bank. So that's 2 bank angles we've got to change here. Now, we do have 3 flight points in which to do that. So, we've got 6 flight points. It's going to cost 3 for each of those bank angle changes. So we could end the move in a left bank, but we will have not been able to even start a turn, much less make the turn. And what we're trying to do is to cut these guys off. So we want to turn inside of them. You can see here, if we just roll from right to left, we're going to go 1, 2, 3 to level, 1, 2, 3 to a left bank. That doesn't look too bad, but remember, these guys are moving this way, and it's going to take us a few more flight points before we can actually get turned this way. We want to try and hit them from the beam, which is why we want to try and cut this corner and come at them this way rather than looping in behind them, which is what's going to happen if we take too long to roll back into a left bank. There is something that is available to us which can help us roll faster. That's called the snap roll. This is one of the maneuvers. It's considered a maneuver in the fighting wing system. And a snap roll is basically the pilot is using much larger stick and rudder inputs to make the aircraft roll faster. The problem with that is it incurs some deceleration because you've got your ailerons and rudder now sticking out into the airflow, and it's going to slow the airplane down a bit. So rolling normally incurs 0 deceleration unless you do a snap roll. What a snap roll will do is a snap roll will reduce the flight point requirements to roll by 1. So if we do a snap roll at speed 6.0, it only takes us 2 flight points in order to change our bank. That means we could do 2 points, roll level, 2 further flight points to roll into a left bank, and we still have 2 flight points left, and then we have to see, could we actually manage to turn the nose with those 2 remaining flight points? In order to figure that out, we look at the turn rate chart. The turn rate chart here, we're speed 6.0. We look across here. If we do a brake turn, it only requires 2 flight points. So it would be possible. I'm not saying that we should, but it is possible. If we do 2 snap rolls to the left and then a brake turn rate left turn, that will allow us to move 2 forward, go 2 more forward, but then we would be facing west, and we would be facing west here as opposed to facing northwest and having to wait until next turn to make that turn. The only problem with that is that we're going to incur a fair amount of deceleration as a result. Each snap roll you do incurs 3 points of deceleration. So that would be 3, 6 for the 2 snap rolls to get into left bank. Then we would incur the brake turn deceleration 1 time, which is another 5. So that's going to be reduced to 4 because of our speed, and I'll mention that here in a little bit. So we're looking at incurring 10 deceleration points to make that kind of that snap roll, quick turn to the left to try to head these guys off. Our engine is only giving us 5 points of acceleration. We will get some acceleration from the descent of 300 feet, but I don't think we're going to be picking up any speed. I don't think we're going to lose any speed. So is it worth it do we want to do this a little more gently and try and build up some speed in the dive, or do we want to get our nose whipped around, get pointed in the right direction, while not necessarily accelerating yet. Once we get pointed in the right direction and then we're just going all downhill, we should be able to pick up a little more speed. So, you know what? I think it's going to be worth it, at least where the lead aircraft is. Leader's going to go ahead then, and he is going to go 2 hexes forward. He's going to do 2 of 2 for a snap roll left to level bank, then a further 2, and he's going to do another snap roll to left bank. Now we have to go one more horizontally forward, and that's going to be 1 of 2 at the brake turn rate, and then our final flight point must be the 1 vertical flight point, which will satisfy our brake turn requirement, and we will be able to turn to west. So again, what this looks like on the map when we do this move, we've got the lead here. He goes 2 hexes forward. He's now rolled level. He snap rolled level. He goes 2 hexes further forward. He's snap rolled to the left. He's going to go 1 hex forward, which puts him on the hex spine between 2644 and 2744, and then he's going to expend 1 vertical flight point, which doesn't move him horizontally. It lowers him in that hex, and then he's going to turn to a heading of west. Now you can see he's not sort of lined up. What happens then is the aircraft will fall, as it were, into this hex here. So he's actually kind of helped himself out because we wanted to avoid getting too far north, and where it happened to work out for him on that hex spine, as he made that turn, he fell into the hex row further south. So it's going to save him a little bit of room heading north. So actually, looking at that, yeah, I think that's definitely worth incurring all of the deceleration that we're going to incur as a result of this quick roll and then tight turn. But it puts us in a real good position vis-a-vis the Wellingtons here. So let's go ahead and record this on the log sheet, and we will see how the deceleration is going to affect his speed for next turn. On the log sheet here for 109, number 1, coming into the turn 1 column here, first thing is the transition rate and steps. We did an easy transition rate of 1 step. Our flight point split then became 5 horizontal and 1 vertical. Mandatory altitude change, because we were in starting altitude was level, it's 0. VFP altitude change, we did 1 flight point, that's 300 feet, and we opted for no optional changes, which gives us a net altitude change of minus 300 feet. Our throttle, we had our throttle set at emergency power. We had no acceleration carry. Our acceleration points for emergency power at this speed is 5. Dive and dive attitude acceleration. We were starting the turn in level attitude, so there is no dive attitude acceleration. However, we descended 300 feet, and if we look at the dive accel climb decel chart real quickly here, you can see our starting speed now was greater than or equal to 5, but not equal to 9. So we're at the second row here, and that's going to be 1.0 per increment. We did 3 increments, so that's going to be 3 dive acceleration. Add that together gives us a total of 8 acceleration points. We had no decel carry. Transition decel, we did an easy turn. Easy is half of the tight turn decel, which from the ADC here is 3, so half of that is 1.5. That's 1.5. We had no climb, inverted or miscellaneous, no. Turn rate decel. Turn rate decel for a brake turn on the 109 E1 that we're flying is normally it's 5. However, at speeds of 5.0 or higher, the aircraft wing has a lower angle of attack, and therefore the drag, there's a reduction in the subsequent drag, which means that you can take the decel rate of the next lower turn rate. So for For us, even though we're doing a brake turn rate, because our speed is 6, we only pay the decel of a hard turn rate. If we were doing a hard turn, we'd pay the tight turn, and if we were doing tight turn, we'd pay easy. You always pay the easy turn rate. There's no decel brake for that. So instead of paying 5 for our turn, we're only going to pay 4. So our turn rate decel is 4. We did a push transition, which means we cannot take any transition credit. Instead of getting half of 1.5 and subtracting that from our turn, we can't do that because we did a push and then we did basically a pull turn, a normal turn. We'd have to do a negative G turn in order to have taken any, or in order to have gotten any transition credit. Which brings us down to maneuver deceleration. I told you snap rolls are considered maneuvers as far as deceleration goes. They incur a flat 3 deceleration points for every snap roll you do. We did 1 to get to level and a second one to get to left bank, which is 2 times 3 decel is a total of 6 decel points. Overspeed, we are at our maximum level speed, not in excess of it, so we don't have any overspeed deceleration yet. So you can see from our transition, our turn and maneuver, we have a total of 11.5 deceleration. And when you start turning your aircraft to your fighters pretty quickly, you can see this total decel shoot up pretty quickly. So what does it look like as far as our net XL decel? We've got 8 minus 11.5. That's going to give us 3.5 points of decel. It's not enough to actually slow the aircraft down, so our net speed change remains 0. However, when we look at the start of next turn and we come up top here to record our starting position information, we are in hex 2644. We are facing west. Our start altitude after descending 300 feet is now 900 feet. Our start speed does remain 6.0. We have no flight point carry. Our angle of bank now has gone from right bank to left bank. We have no turn or maneuver carry, and our flight attitude now is a shallowed dive. Coming down here, we have no acceleration. We have a deceleration carry, which is going to come in right here, and that is going to be 3.5. So now 109 number 1, the lead 109 has made the turn. He's slowing down or starting to slow down a little bit as a result of the maneuvering that he's done, but he's in a I think he's in a better position now than he would be if he was a little more gentle on the controls. So next up, we will take care of his wingman here in 2, and then we'll move on to the trailing pair. Now looking at where his wingman is here, number 2, if we look at doing the same thing, snap roll, and then a brake turn, that's going to put him here in 2545, which is going to put him even further south. He's a couple of hexes back, so that's probably a wash, but it's going to put him in probably relatively the same situation with respect to the Wellingtons here as his lead. So you know what? I think I am pretty comfortable having 109 number 2 just do the exact same move, which is going to be a emergency power again. We're going to do that push easy 1 to a shallow dive. It's going to give us 5 and 1. And again, we'll not take any optional. We'll do our snap roll to level, snap roll to left bank, and then a brake turn, and we're going to end up falling into the hex. So it's 1, 2. Now we've snap rolled to level. 2 hexes further forward brings us to a left bank. We go 1 more hex forward, and now 1 vertical to complete the turn and the move, and that's going to have us fall into 2545. I will go ahead and record that on number 2's log sheet. It's going to look exactly the same as the leads log sheet, except for the location hex, which is going to be 2545. So I'll go ahead and record that, and then we'll pop back and we'll see what we want to do with the trailing pair, if they are going to kind of do the same thing. They're going to basically follow the maneuver. They may not make the turn quite as hard though, because you can see they've got a little more room to the south, being trailing like they are. They also have a little more altitude that they may end up taking some optional descent here as well. So we'll take a look at that in a minute. Let me go ahead and fill out number two's log sheet, and we'll finish up with the trailing pair. Looking at the trailing pair's position here, they are going to want to get that turn going to the left and match what the lead pair did, and put themselves in a position to to attack the Wellingtons here from the beam rather than getting in behind them. And looking at things, if they snap roll here, if they basically do the exact same move as the lead, it'll be 2, 4 here, fall into this hex. They'll be right here and facing west. They are 200 feet higher. The question becomes, do they want to take any optional altitude loss in addition to the 300 feet from the vertical flight point? And you can see when you end in a shallow, you're able to take up to 1/3 of your total flight points rounded down. They have 6 flight points. That would be an additional 200 feet. That would leave them at 900 feet, which would be at the same altitude as the lead pair. It would give them 2 extra acceleration points, and we saw that the lead pair are going to be carrying over 3.5 decel. That means they would carry over only 1.5 decel. I don't know that that's worth it now. I'm going to hold on to that altitude. So I think in the end, actually, I think we are going to have the trailing pair do the exact same maneuver. We're going to go 2 hexes forward here with number 3. We're going to snap roll to level. We're going to snap roll to a left bank here. We're going to go 1 last horizontal forward, then a vertical flight point down, and complete that break turn to a heading of west here. And 1, 2, 3, 4. I think this will work. That's snap roll to level here, snap roll to left bank, 1 forward, and then fall into the hex here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you can see they're actually still in formation. The one other parameter to be considered in formation, I believe you have to be on or behind the lead aircraft's 3 to 9 line. So his 3 o'clock line this way and 9 o'clock line this way. You can see that they are behind that. They are heading in the same direction. They're within 6 hexes, and they are only 200 feet above them. So they are still considered in formation. If that mattered in this particular scenario, which it does not, because we know the Germans are all going to be moving after all of the British bombers. So the only thing that remains is to go ahead and record on the log sheet both of their moves, and that will then bring us to the tailing declaration and combat phase of turn 1. After all the aircraft have moved and you've completed the movement phase, we move into the combat phase. And the first thing we'll do in the combat phase is make any tailing declarations. Now, tailing in the Fighting Wing series is actually pretty important. An aircraft can declare another aircraft that they are tailing if they meet the requirements to do so. The advantages of tailing another aircraft is that you will then move in the next turn. You will move immediately after the tailed aircraft moves. So you are going to get to see where he goes and where he ends up before you have to do your move. It's a huge, huge advantage being able to move knowing where the bad guy is going to be. Now, this is irrespective of whatever you roll for your initiative. In fact, technically, you really don't even have to roll initiative, because your initiative is essentially the guy that you're tailing. You are so kind of locked in on following that particular aircraft that you've given up your initiative, if you will. So it's not like you get a choice of which one's better. It's when you declare that tail, you are committing to move immediately after the guy you're tailing. But again, it's almost always worth it to do so. Now, there are 2 tests that you can do, 2 methods to meet the tailing requirements. The first one is what's known as the simple test. The second one is the deflection test. With the simple test, in order to tail an aircraft, the aircraft that you want to declare that you are tailing has to be within your 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock. This is your front arc, 11 o'clock to the 1 o'clock lines. It can be on that line or in here. So the bad guy has to be in your 11 to 1 o'clock, and you have to be within the tailing aircraft's 5 to 7 o'clock. So basically his rear arc. So if your front arc is in his rear arc, you are then, and the total range is equal to or less than 8 hexes, then you are able to declare tailing via the simple test. In this case here, you can see the lead 109 is within the rear arc of Wellington number 3. However, is Wellington number 3 actually looks like it is. If we go on the 1 o'clock line, which is going to be this hex spine coming out here, we follow that out here, and you can see that Wellington number 3 does lie exactly on the lead 109's 1 o'clock line. Now, so what that means is the Wellington 3 is in number 1's front arc. Number 1 is in Wellington number 3's rear arc. What about the range? It's 2, 4, 6. It's 8 hexes horizontally, but we're talking about total range here. Remember, it's a three-dimensional battlefield that we're on. So the horizontal distance is 8 hexes. What's the vertical distance? Well, Wellington number 3, he's the high guy. He is at, where do you go here? He is currently at 600 foot of altitude. The lead 109 is at 900 feet of altitude. So that's a 300-foot difference. And remember, in this system, every 300 feet of vertical distance is the equivalent of 1 hex. So we are 8 hexes horizontally, and we are 1 hex vertically. The total distance formula is that you take the longest distance and you add half of the shortest distance, rounding down to get the total distance. So in this case, we have 8 horizontal plus 1 vertical. We're going to take half of the vertical distance because it's the shortest distance, which means we are at 8 plus 1/2 gives us a total range of 8.5. 8.5 rounds down to 8, which means that technically 109 number 1 could declare that he is tailing Wellington number 3 because he meets it via the simple test. The other test, if you don't meet the requirements of the simple test, you may still be able to tail somebody via the deflection test. Now, the deflection test has a number of prerequisites that I don't want to get into necessarily right now. I think we'll have an opportunity to discuss that in future turns, perhaps. But again, with this particular scenario, because one side is all medium bombers and the other side is all single-seat fighters, tailing is not really a big deal because all of the British aircraft have to move before any of the German aircraft. So the Germans are always going to get the advantage of seeing where the British bombers end up before they have to do their move. So tailing would just do the same thing. So there's no reason or need to declare tailing. I may point out, like we did in this particular situation, where an aircraft may be eligible for a tail. But other than that, I don't think we're going to get into tailing too much in this particular playthrough. After tailing declarations are made, we now take any potential shot declarations, and we would resolve the shots in the combat phase. Now, you can see the Wellington, we mentioned the rear turret. The rear turret is in fact pointing directly at the lead 109. The question is, do we have any kind of shot? Well, let's look at the Wellington's firepower chart here. We're looking at the rear turret, which has 2 .303 caliber Browning machine guns. We come down to find out how many gun factors we're going to have. We've already established that the range is 8 hexes. And if we look here at the range only goes out to 7 hexes, but you can see the rear turret can't even fire that far. These machine guns, furthest they can reach out is a 5 hex range. So the gunner may be able to put his sights on the 109, but he's too far out of range to take any shots. The firing arc for the 109, we said he's in the front arc. However, because the 109 turned with his last flight point, he doesn't have his full normal front arc firing arc. What happens is the arc becomes straight out here on the 12 o'clock line, and it comes out on the 11 o'clock line. So he is down this way. And normally with a forward firing arc, it is if he's flying straight forward without turning, his forward arc is the hex row directly in front of him. It doesn't go out in the full frontal arc here, the full 60-degree arc. This is a system, fighting wings, where getting a shot on an enemy aircraft, particularly a maneuverable fighter, is something that is difficult to do. So when you do get that shot, if you do manage to shoot something down, you have achieved something. So in this case, I don't see, there's nobody in the firing arcs of the 109s, and likewise, the only aircraft that's in anybody's firing arc, because the firing arc here for the rear turret is not going to be able to swing around far enough to shoot at him. Same with the lead Wellington here. So they have nobody in their arcs. The Germans have nobody in their arcs. It's just the rear gunner here, and we've already established he's out of range. So there's no combat here on turn 1. That brings us to the end of turn 1, and we now roll into turn 2. But this video has gone on much longer than I originally anticipated, so I'm going to go ahead and stop this episode here. We'll start up with a new episode, picking up right at the beginning of turn 2. I anticipate we're going to get a lot more done in the next episode, because I did take quite a bit of time going over the aircraft data cards and introducing a lot of stuff as we went through the first moves here. There's so much information on these ADCs that I really wanted to spend some time and talk about that and discuss a little bit maybe about the tactics that each side is going to try to use here in the scenario. But that's going to do it for today, and we'll pick up with the 109s diving down on the Wellingtons that are desperately running for cover, at least a couple of them, and the third guy is just trying to run. So again, thanks for watching today. I know it's been quite a while since the last video upload on the channel, and hopefully we're going to get the second episode in this playthrough up right after this one. So once again, take care. Till next time, we'll see you then.